Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something a little different. We're going to drop you straight into the middle of a Viking winter. And to be blunt, you probably won't survive this. Not unless you're very clever, very resourceful, or willing to eat some very questionable things. This isn't a fantasy RPG with endless inventory slots and a magical fire spell. You're a real person in 9th century Scandinavia, and winter has come. Hard. The fjords are freezing, and the snowdrifts are already waist-high, and the sun's packing it in after about 4 hours. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I promise no horned helmets, those are a myth, and lots of near-death experiences. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now, okay? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first flakes fall like whispers. They don't warn you. They just settle on your shoulders, on your hair, and you think, okay, snow, how bad can it be? You're standing on the edge of a clearing, where a few crooked wooden huts lean into the wind. Smoke trails lazily from sod roofs, already crusted with ice. The air smells of pine smoke and something less pleasant, stew maybe, or an animal they didn't skin fast enough. Behind you, the forest looms. The birches have shed their leaves like a snake its skin. Ahead, village life. And no, they don't look especially happy to see you. Your boots are soaked. That's bad. Because it's late October, and around here that means winter. Real winter. There are no fake-outs, no cute snow days. The sun has begun its retreat, dipping low on the horizon and refusing to rise for more than a few dim hours a day. It's called the polar night, and it will only get darker from here. Literally. You step into the village and immediately understand the stakes. These people have already started rationing. No one walks idly. The men are chopping wood like their lives depend on it. And they kinda do. The women are gutting fish and scraping hides, their hands red and raw from cold water. There's a child crying somewhere, and no one's comforting them. Not because they're heartless, they just don't have time. You are now in a world where every hour of daylight must be used efficiently, or your lungs will freeze from the inside come January. A shaggy dog eyes you. It's got one ear and a mean snarl, but it's also got warmth. You briefly consider hugging it. Instead, a man approaches. He doesn't greet you, he just looks you over, thin coat, weird shoes, and a strange lack of calluses on your hands. Then he sighs. If you want to live, you better start chopping. You're handed an axe, not a ceremonial one, not the kind with cool Viking carvings and leather wrapping. This is a work axe, and the handle is slick with use. It's heavier than you expected. You've just been conscripted into survival. Factually speaking, the Norse winters could dip well below freezing for weeks, sometimes months, without a thaw. Ice would form in the livestock's water troughs by mid-afternoon. Rivers froze solid. And if you weren't prepared, you didn't just have a bad time, you disappeared from the family saga. You're led to the woodpile. It's more of a wood wall. Someone's been stacking firewood methodically, and it smells of sap and effort. The man gestures to a log. You set it on the chopping block. Raise the axe, bring it down, miss completely. The log rolls off. The man doesn't say anything. He just hands you the axe again. So begins your introduction to Norse hospitality. By nightfall, okay, late afternoon, you're already exhausted. Your shoulders ache. Your hands are blistered. But you've managed to chop enough wood to not be considered totally useless. Someone tosses you a chunk of dried fish. It tastes like salty leather and possibly regret. You chew anyway. The calories are non-negotiable. And when the woman next to you sees your grimace, she just shrugs and says something that roughly translates to better than chewing snow. Quirky truth? The Vikings used urine to soften leather. Human urine. Yes, it was collected and stored for that purpose. You try not to think about that while licking your fish-stained fingers. As darkness falls completely, the temperature plummets. There is no gentle twilight. One moment it's dim, the next it's black. They guide you into a longhouse, a low, smoky building that smells like sweat, meat, and smouldering wood. The heat hits you like a wall. The fire pit in the centre is burning steadily. It's the village's heart, and it will not go out until spring. If it dies, people die. The others find space on fur-covered benches or curl up near the walls wrapped in wool blankets. You're given a spot near the door, still warm enough to live, but not prestigious. You don't mind. You sit there and listen to the wind clawing at the wooden walls trying to get in. Someone starts telling a story about a drauga, a restless winter spirit that rises when people die improperly buried in the snow. You laugh nervously. No one else does. Then they stare at you until you stop. Here's something scholars still debate. Did Viking settlements suffer mass casualties during especially harsh winters, or were they surprisingly resilient thanks to communal living and smart resource use? The sagas suggest both. Some years, whole farms vanished. Other times, they held on with sheer stubbornness and smoked fish. Your eyes grow heavy. The fire crackles. Someone snores. The Draugr tail still crawls around your brain, curling up in your ears. You shift under a borrowed blanket that smells like goat. Outside, the wind howls, and you understand for the first time that this isn't just winter. This is survival season, and you've only just arrived. Morning doesn't come so much as it glooms. There's no sunrise in the way you're used to, just a slow lightening of the smoke-stained air inside the longhouse. Someone stirs near the hearth, throws another chunk of wood on the embers, and pokes it with a stick until the flames leap again. The cold is already crawling under your borrowed blanket, tugging at your toes and seeping into your bones like a jealous ghost. It's time to move, or freeze. Outside, it's worse. The wind hits like a slap. Your breath fogs immediately, freezing on your eyelashes. And the snow, the snow is deeper than yesterday. It's crusted over in places, shiny and deceptive, then suddenly collapses beneath your feet with a wet whoomp. You nearly fall on your face. Someone laughs. A child, probably. Great. Humiliation is universal. The man from yesterday, let's call him Eric, because he looks like he could crush you with his beard alone, points toward a partially constructed shelter on the edge of the village. It's a hut, barely waist high, with walls of stacked turf and wooden posts that creak in the cold. You're building your own shelter today, not as punishment, though maybe a little, but because winter won't be over for months, and everyone needs a place to sleep that isn't the longhouse. That's reserved for families, elders, and people who don't almost chop off their own foot on day one, so you get to work. First the frame, thick pine branches lashed together with twisted fibres. No nails here, just raw ingenuity and a lot of cursing. Your fingers go numb almost immediately, and you discover the Norse secret to staying warm: never stop moving. As soon as you pause to admire your handiwork, your joints stiffen, and the chill creeps under your layers. Eric yells something that sounds encouraging, but probably it isn't, then tosses you a wad of moss. For insulation, someone explains. You shove it between the turf blocks like you know what you're doing. Fact check. Yes, Vikings really built turf houses. Wood was scarce in many parts of Scandinavia, especially during long winters, so they used what they had. Turf, as in grass and soil blocks, provided surprisingly good insulation. It also smelled like dirt, mould and history. Charming. By midday, technically it's 11:30 a.m, the sun's already on its way down. Your hut is halfway done, your muscles are howling, and your fingers feel like stiff sausages. You take a break and crouch near the communal fire pit again, blowing into your hands like that's going to help. An old woman nearby sharpens a bone needle with terrifying precision and offers you a swig from a skin flask. You take it, not wanting to be rude. It burns like lightning going down. Some kind of fermented something. You nod politely while tears stream down your face. Here's the open debate. How much of Viking survival was technique versus sheer stubborn will? Some historians argue they had sophisticated methods for weatherproofing homes and storing food, while others say, nah, they were just incredibly tough and a little bit reckless. You're starting to think it's both. You've seen people patch a hole in a wall with fur and prayer, and it worked. Back at your hut, progress slows. You realise you forgot to angle the roof correctly, so the snow will just pile up until it crushes the whole thing like a marshmallow dropped on a cracker. Eric inspects it with a grunt and rips out the top beams without hesitation. Again, he says, you're not sure if that's a command or a condemnation. Either way, you fix it. Quirky bit? Some Viking shelters included built-in livestock compartments. Yeah, you'd literally share a wall and warmth with goats or sheep. It's disgusting, it's brilliant, and it saves your skin when the wind shrieks at night. You glance over at the neighbour's hut and yep, there's a goat head poking out of a hay door. You briefly consider offering it half your fish ration as a bribe to share body heat. As evening drips in like cold ink, your hut is finally mostly done. Is it cute? No. Is it comfortable? Couple? Not unless your standards are dry-ish. But it's yours. You've stuffed every crack with moss, bark, and a few tufts of your own hair, you don't want to talk about it, and you've laid a bed of spruce branches across the floor to keep off the worst of the cold. You're told to hang a bundle of herbs at the entrance. Keeps away evil spirits, or at least smells less like feet. You don't argue. Inside, it's quiet. The walls are thick enough to block some wind, and your small fire crackles inside a makeshift pit ringed with rocks. The roof sags slightly. The smoke curls up toward a hole you forgot to properly carve. You open a side flap and the smoke drifts out. For now, you're breathing in about 500 years of chimney mistakes. Still, it's warm. Warmer than outside anyway. You sit on your bed of branches, wrapped in a blanket that once belonged to something large and angry, and feel oddly proud. You made shelter, with your hands, and only minor frostbite. Through the cracks, you can hear singing. Somewhere nearby, someone is humming an old Norse melody, low and droning, more rhythm than tune. It's not joyful. It's survival music. You feel it in your ribs. Later, a young girl from the village comes by and brings you a chunk of lard wrapped in bark. For fuel, she says. You try not to eat it like a granola bar. Instead, you toss it onto the fire, and it flares, warming your tiny home with greasy heat. This is how you'll live. Scraps, gifts, borrowed knowledge, and a whole lot of fire. That night, the wind howls again like a voice searching for something it lost in the snow. But this time you have walls, you have a roof. You curl up under your animal blanket, shift on your makeshift bed, and smile just a little. You're still here, which in a Viking winter is kind of a miracle. The fire is dying. You wake up coughing, throat scratchy from the smoke that didn't quite escape your makeshift chimney. Your nose is cold enough to snap off, and your fingers feel more like tools than limbs. Morning again, well, something that passes for morning. A dull grey filters through the turf cracks like a half-hearted apology. You sit up stiffly, brushing pine needles from your face and shoulders. Welcome to day 3. If you're keeping score, you've survived approximately 48 hours longer than anyone expected. But now you've got a new mission. Fire. Not just your sad, smoky campfire with its half-burned moss logs, but real fire, the kind that cooks, warms, and makes you less likely to become a human popsicle in your sleep. Because out here, fire is everything. It's your stove, your security system, your therapist, and your god. Without it, you're a walking meat popsicle just waiting for a tragic saga to be written in your honour. Spoiler, no one remembers the extras. Outside, the snow is glittering and deceptively beautiful, blanketing the village in that pristine, white, Instagram-filtered aesthetic. Don't fall for it. This is a death trap. The muffled sound hides hazards and sucks the heat right out of your body. You wade through it like cold oatmeal, heading toward the communal hearth where several villagers are already gathered, bleary-eyed and grumbling. Eric greets you with a grunt and tosses you a flint and a rock. "Make spark," he says, with all the warmth of a snow-covered boulder. You kneel beside a pile of dry birch bark and pine shavings. They have clearly done most of the prep work, but this is your test now. Here's the thing, you've seen people make fire with flint and steel in movies. It looks easy. Just a little spark, a little puff of smoke, and boom, instant campfire, right? Wrong. You strike the flint again and again, each spark dancing away before it can land anywhere useful. Your hands are trembling from the cold and nerves, and you can feel Eric's judgmental eyes burrowing into your back. Finally, after what feels like an entire Norse epoch, a spark catches. The bark begins to smoulder. You lean in, gently breathing life into it, whispering like it's a secret. A flicker of flame. You feed it slowly. Shavings first, then thin twigs. The fire grows inch by inch until you've coaxed it into a real living thing. Someone claps once. You don't know who, but you pretend it was Odin himself. Fun fact, the Vikings sometimes used fungus to carry embers long distances. Specifically, tinder fungus or amadou. They'd dry it, soak it in urine to make it more flammable, because of course they would, and tuck it into leather pouches, like a pocket fire, ready to go. You think about this as you nurse your fledgling blaze. Honestly, kind of genius. With fire comes responsibility. You're now in charge of keeping your hut warm through the night, which means learning the fine art of banking the fire. This is not putting a fire in a literal bank, though honestly, it's just as valuable. It's the process of covering embers with ash to keep them smouldering until morning. Too much ash and it suffocates. Too little and it dies. You get one shot each night. No pressure. You spend the next few hours gathering firewood, and by gathering we mean trudging into the woods with an axe that has seen better centuries. The trees groan under the weight of snow. You've been warned not to stand beneath overloaded branches. One sudden shake, and you'll be buried faster than a dishonoured jarl. You chop a few small firs, drag them back, and start the tedious process of splitting logs with numb fingers and frozen breath. Meanwhile, inside the longhouse, fires are kept burning continuously. There's no central chimney, just a smoke hole that may or may not do its job, depending on the wind. The air inside stays warm, sure, but it's also thick with smoke. People's eyes are permanently red. Babies cough in their cradles, but it's better than freezing, or being outside. Scholars still debate just how smoky and unpleasant Viking homes were. Some argue they were surprisingly efficient in managing airflow, with clever venting and soot patterns that suggest they knew their stuff. Others point to excavation finds where blackened ceilings and lung-choking ash deposits paint a picture of indoor barbecuing minus the fun. Back at your own shelter, you build your evening fire like a nervous parent prepping a baby for bedtime. You layer the fuel carefully, whisper apologies to the wood, and guard your tiny flamer like it's your last hope. Because, well, it kind of is. You've even managed to scrounge up a few lumps of dried dung from the livestock pens. That's right. You're burning poop now. It burns slow and hot, and it smells exactly how you'd expect, but you're too cold to care. That night, the fire holds. Barely. You wake up at least 3 times to feed it, each time fumbling for more fuel with stiff hands, but you're learning. Fire doesn't forgive laziness, but it rewards obsession. Here's your fringe tidbit of the day. Norse mythology is full of fire symbolism. From the eternal fires of Muspelheim, the realm of fire giants, to the forging flames of the dwarves' smithies, fire was seen as both a creative and destructive force. It wasn't just warmth, it was transformation. Survive a winter fireless, and you were considered cursed. Survive with fire, and maybe, just maybe, you'd earn a story worth telling. You sit at the edge of your now glowing hearth, wrapped in your increasingly goat-smelling blanket, watching the embers dance like miniature spirits. The wind rattles the outside walls, but you barely flinch. You've got fire, you've got shelter. You've even got a growing callus on your palm that suggests maybe, just maybe, you're becoming a Viking, one blister at a time. Tomorrow they'll teach you how to hunt, or maybe how to layer up without becoming a walking pile of wet wool. But tonight, you've passed the test, you're still warm, you're still here, and the fire is still burning. The cold has opinions. That's what you realise the next morning as you wake up to find your breath frosting in the air and your toes politely threatening to detach. The fire is a sad circle of greyed over coals. You did your best, but the embers died sometime in the early hours. Outside, snow was drifted halfway up your doorway. You push it open with your shoulder, and the wind slaps you full in the face, sharp and personal. Yeah, the cold is mad at you today. Your boots, if you can even call them that, are frozen stiff. You curse softly, teeth chattering, as you shove your feet into them anyway. It feels like sliding your toes into 2 blocks of salted ice. This is when you begin to truly appreciate the ancient Norse art of layering. Not fashion layering, survival layering. These people wore wool like it was armour. Wool tunics, wool leg wraps, wool under everything. And then fur cloaks, fur mittens, fur shoes stuffed with grass insulation that you now realise isn't just quirky Viking stuff, it's life-saving insulation science. Today a woman named Solveig offers to show you how to layer up like you actually want to live. She's about your height, twice your strength, and has exactly 0 patience for your soft outerwear. She eyes your modern jacket with suspicion and gestures for you to remove it. You hesitate. She narrows her eyes. Off it goes. In exchange, she hands you a thick woolen tunic patched with what might be cat fur and a belt. Then come the leg wraps, long strips of wool wrapped tightly around your lower legs from ankle to knee and tied off with leather cords. Keeps snow out, keeps warmth in, she says, smacking your calf with approval. You're handed boots next. They're made from reindeer hide and lined with dry grass. Not fancy, but when you slide your feet into them, it's like someone turned on the heat. Not hot, but not frostbite either. A win. You add a heavy cloak made of sheepskin and pull it tight around your shoulders. The transformation is immediate. You still feel the cold, but now it's like standing behind a window watching it scream at you from outside. Historical fact. The Norse had access to wool in abundance, thanks to hardy sheep breeds, and it was the material of choice for winter clothing. Wool retains warmth even when wet, which is critical in a snowy, wet, sleety hellscape like a Viking winter. And yes, they really did stuff their shoes with grass. It's called senegras and it worked. Solvi takes you through a few practicals next. How to move in all this gear without tripping over yourself, how to sit without flashing your vulnerable parts to the wind, and how to adjust your layers depending on activity. Too much sweat and it freezes later, she warns. You make a mental note not to jog anywhere, ever. You walk through the village feeling less like a tourist and more like a small woolly mammal. No one is wearing the same thing exactly. Each piece is handmade, repaired, repatched and layered with years of wear. But everyone has that same bundled, practical look. The babies are wrapped like sausages. Even the dogs have fur capes tied around their backs. The goats are just being goats. Quirky side note. Viking warriors didn't go into battle shirtless in the snow. That's just Hollywood nonsense. Even berserkers, those infamous mad fighters, likely wore thick animal hides and multiple layers. The shirtless oiled abs aesthetic was probably invented by someone who's never had to pee in 20 wind chill. Midday it arrives, such as it is, and you actually feel okay. Not warm exactly, but not freezing. Your face is the only exposed part of you now, and Solveig solves that with a strip of wool and a smear of animal fat. Wind mask, she says. And don't eat it. You very nearly lick your lips out of habit. Crisis averted. You're invited to join the village in hauling a freshly caught deer back from the edge of the woods. Everyone's bundled up like you now, trudging through the snow with ropes slung over their shoulders. The deer is big, heavy and frozen solid, caught in a snare trap and dispatched before breakfast. This is winter food gold. Everyone works together, no complaining, just grunt and pull. You're starting to understand. Community is the heating system here. No one gets through this season alone. Open scholarly debate time. How much layering did the average Norse person wear during a harsh winter day? Some argue 2 to 3 layers were standard. Inner tunics, outer tunics, cloaks and hoods, while others suggest layering was lighter during labour to avoid sweat. Either way, no one was out here in a single fur cape like a fashion runway. That's a fast track to frostbite and ridicule. After the deer is butchered and hung for processing, you're rewarded with a warm drink. It's like a broth. Salty, oily and faintly herbal. Not exactly delicious, but it goes down smooth and sits warm in your stomach like a polite fire. You huddle near the longhouse again, cloaked and hooded, watching the wind pick up the snow in twisting ghosts across the fields. Later, back in your hut you layer up for sleep. Yes, sleep requires layers too. You don't strip down. This isn't modern times with radiators and weighted blankets. You sleep in your tunic, your leggings and your socks. If you're lucky, a fur over your feet. If you're smart, you bring a warm rock from the fire to place at your feet under the blanket. Just don't kick it and burn your toes off. It's a fine line between cosy and cauterized. You drift off wrapped in wool and silence, your own breath echoing against the turf walls. Outside the wind prowls again. You hear a distant howl. Wolf? Wind? Hard to say, doesn't matter. You've got your layers, you've got your fire, and you've got a newfound respect for itchy wool socks and the people who made them by hand with frozen fingers. You're not warm, but you're not dead. That's progress. You wake up to the sound of something scraping across the roof of your turf hut, a slow, deliberate drag, like claws or maybe just snow sliding in a lazy avalanche. You don't move right away, you listen, nothing else. No footsteps, no voices, just the muffled groan of the wind outside and the distant creak of wood under pressure. Then, like a cold slap from reality, your stomach reminds you you're hungry, really hungry, and the 2 bites of dried fish in your satchel aren't going to cut it. Welcome to Viking Winter rule number 5. Eat now or die later. Today you're going to learn the fine, messy art of not starving. That means food, finding it, preserving it, and figuring out how to make it last through months of darkness and frost. You step out of your hut bundled in your now slightly aromatic wool ensemble, boots crunching through the hardened snow. The sky is a flat grey dome. It might as well be made of stone. There's no sun, just light smeared thin across the clouds like cold butter. Solveig waves you over to a storage shed near the edge of the village. It's built into a slope partially buried in snowstorm, with thick wooden beams and a heavy door layered with dried moss. Inside, the air is dense with the scent of smoke, salt, and a hint of rot. Not fresh rot, just the kind that suggests meat has lived here a very long time. Hanging from the rafters are racks of dried fish, cuts of meat tied in tight coils, and bundles of herbs with names you can't pronounce. This is their pantry, and it smells like survival. She hands you a long, flat knife and a piece of reindeer meat that's frozen solid. Cut thin, she says, thaws faster. You do your best, sawing through the meat with hands that still haven't forgiven you for yesterday's firewood mission. The cuts are jagged, uneven, but acceptable. Solveig doesn't laugh, which feels like progress. The meal that follows is boiled in a pot that's probably older than most of the people in the village. It's a stew, technically. Mostly water, some shredded root vegetables, bits of meat, a chunk of lard, and a few flakes of what might be dried onion. It tastes better than it sounds. Warm, salty, rich in a way your stomach understands better than your tongue. As you eat, you realise this isn't about flavour. It's about calories. Norse winters required planning months in advance. Drying, salting, fermenting. Those weren't optional culinary styles. They were what stood between life and an icy death. Fish was caught in nets during the brief summer, and air-dried on racks by the coast. Meat was smoked in low, blackened rooms that smelled like campfires and iron. Even milk was turned into sour cheese and butter, stored in wooden tubs and buried in snowbanks like prehistoric refrigerators. Fringe fact, Vikings sometimes buried whole barrels of fish underground to ferment over the winter. These became surströmming, fermented herrings so pungent that modern taste testers gag on the smell alone. The good news, you don't have to eat that today. The bad news, you might have to eat it later. You're tasked next with checking the fish racks. These are long wooden frames set outside, angled to catch wind and low sunlight. Rows of dried cod tied by their tails hang stiff and rattling like ghostly wind chimes. You tap one, it makes a hollow clonk. That's a good sign. That means it's dry. You help tie more strips of fresh fish to the rack using sinew cord, hands burning in the cold despite your mittens. The process is mechanical but meditative. There's comfort in repetition. Then comes the unpleasant part, preserving guts and offal. Nothing is wasted here. You help stuff intestines with seasoned meat scraps, twist them closed, and hang them near the fire to dry. It's gruesome but necessary. Solveig doesn't flinch once. She sees you gag a little and just says, "You'll be grateful for that in February, done." You believe her. Historical debate time, were Viking diets as meat-heavy as we think? Some scholars argue their diet leaned more toward grains, dairy and fish, with meat reserved for feasts or the wealthy. Others point to the sheer amount of animal bones found in middens, trash heaps, and say, nah, they definitely ate more meat than we give them credit for. The truth? Probably a bit of both. They ate what they had. And in winter, what they had got weird fast. Lunch, if you can call it that, is a shared bowl of porridge made from barley and goat milk, topped with a few berries that were dried in autumn and now look like tiny wrinkled marbles. You eat with your fingers, scooping the porridge from a communal bowl with others. There are no utensils here, just trust and rough hands. It's warm, it's filling. You love it more than any food you've had in months. That afternoon you join a group heading to check the food pit. That's right, the pit. It's literally a hole in the frozen earth lined with straw and rocks, covered with wooden planks and snow to keep out animals. This is cold storage, Viking style. They dig through layers of snow and reveal sacks of grain, smoked fish wrapped in birch bark, and even a couple of frozen apples. You didn't even realise they had apples. They toss one to you. It's soft, wrinkled, and tastes vaguely like cider mixed with dirt. Still, it's fruit, and it's glorious. Quirky fact, Vikings drank mead year-round, including in winter. Not just to party, but because fermentation helped kill bacteria in water. So yes, that warm buzz you feel from the weak honey wine someone handed you at dinner is not just a treat, it's a survival strategy. Cheers. That evening, as the fire crackles in your hut and your belly feels less like a hollow echo chamber, you realise how food transforms the season. Not just nutritionally, but emotionally. It's not just fuel, it's community. It's tradition. It's the thing that brings people into the same room, even when the wind screams at the door and darkness clutches the eaves. You fall asleep with a belly full of barley, dried fish from Rotorworth, and a smear of animal fat on your lips, and still better than chapped skin. Outside, the snow falls silently. Inside, you dream of stew, apples, and somehow, against all odds, not starving to death in a turf hut you barely knew how to build. So far, so good. The wind has a particular howl this morning. Not just your usual angry, blustery banshee cry, but something deeper. It hums low, vibrates through the wooden beams of your hut, and makes your teeth ache. You lie still for a while, staring up at the sagging ceiling, listening as it rattles your door like a drunk trying to find the right key. Then you hear it. Footsteps outside, multiple, crunching snow, approaching. You sit up fast, pulling on your boots, and push open the door just as 3 villagers pass by, heads down, ropes slung over their shoulders. They don't speak, but one of them, the one with the black fur cloak and the permanent scowl, nods. It's an invitation, sort of. You're being included, which, in Viking terms, is a survival upgrade. Today it's not about firewood, not about stew, not about fixing your roof before the next storm. Though, let's be clear, you probably should do that soon. Today it's about alliances, friendships, social webbing, the kind that keeps you from being forgotten when the food runs low or the wolves start circling. You're going to learn that here in this frozen outpost, surviving the winter isn't just about what you can hunt, cook or burn. It's also about who you know. You follow the group across the hard-packed snow. The sun, if it's up it, is somewhere behind a wall of pale grey. Everyone walks in silence, breathing hard through scarves and cloaks. The village is quiet, too quiet. You realise most people are either inside, conserving warmth, or scattered in small teams like this one, tending to tasks no one talks about but everyone respects. That's the rhythm now. Divide, conquer, return before dark. The group leads you to the edge of the forest, where a makeshift lean-to stands half buried in snow. Inside, several young men are sharpening tools, sickles, axes, skinning knives. They glance up at you, eyes squinting through frost-rimmed lashes, but don't say anything. Then a heavy-set man with braided grey hair walks in. He studies you for a long beat and grunts. "You still breathing, good." That's the closest thing to a compliment you've gotten all week. This is Halvard, the unofficial LDR and one of the few people with enough authority to decide who gets food, shelter, or a place at the fire. He doesn't waste time. "You're going to help Jorund, that one," he points, with the limp and bad attitude. Jorund nods once, like someone who doesn't expect much from anyone and prefers to keep it that way. He hands you a bundle of snares and a rabbit pelt. "We check traps, maybe lucky." Lucky, in Viking winter terms, means not going to bed with your stomach clawing itself. As you and Jorund walk into the woods, he doesn't say much. He limps slightly, favouring one leg, and carries a wickedly curved knife that looks older than any of the buildings back in the village. Eventually he breaks the silence. "You chop wood bad, but you quiet. That's better." It's a backhanded compliment, but you'll take it. Over the next few hours, you learn the delicate dance of trap lines, thin wire snares strung between trees, baited with dried fish or rotten fruit. The snow is deep and heavy, and each step is a slow sink into knee-high white. You follow the tracks, look for signs, scuffs in the snow, disturbed branches, the occasional smear of red. Most traps are empty. A few have been sprung and abandoned. Then to jackpot. A rabbit, still warm, caught in a loop of gut string and struggling weakly. Jorund dispatches it quickly, muttering something you don't quite catch, and hands it to you. You're first. You gut it. You hesitate. The rabbit blinks once, then goes still. Your hands tremble, but you do what you're told. The knife slides in, steam rises from the tiny body into the cold air like smoke from a candle. You feel something in your throat that you don't want to admit is sadness. But you also feel something else, determination. This is what survival looks like. Historical footnote: Vikings weren't just pillagers, they were practical survivalists. Hunting and trapping weren't side jobs, they were essential, especially in isolated settlements. From birds to hares to the occasional unlucky fox, meat caught in the wild was a precious supplement to dried stores, and every villager, young or old, was expected to contribute. After checking a dozen more traps, you return with 3 rabbits and a squirrel so scrawny it might be more bone than meal. Back at the lean-to, the group starts cleaning the animals while others tend a small fire. You notice something strange. No one's hoarding, no one's hiding food. Everything is shared, even the small stuff. You wonder how long that'll last if the winter stretches longer than expected. Open scholarly debate here. Was Viking village life truly communal, or was it more hierarchical than the sagas suggest? Some historians argue for a strong Jarl-led structure where the wealthy controlled resources. Others believe that in the harshest conditions, survival forced even the proudest warrior into cooperation. The evidence? Mixed. But out here, in this forest, you're seeing the softer edges of a hard people. The rest of the day is spent helping carry wood and game back to the village. By now, your legs ache constantly and your fingers are permanently red, but you're no longer watched with suspicion. Jorund actually bumps your shoulder once, playfully, you think, and mutters, You don't talk much. Good. Talking wastes heat. That night, you're invited to eat at the longhouse with the hunting team. You sit shoulder to shoulder, eating hot stew thickened with barley and meat you helped catch. There's laughter, real laughter, and a few people toss dried herbs into the fire, sending up sweet smoke that smells like pine and mint. Someone passes a carved horn filled with mead. You sip and nearly choke. It's strong. It's also the warmest thing you've tasted in days. Quirky survival custom? Vikings believed in guest rights, hospitality laws that meant travellers and outsiders had a right to shelter and food even from strangers. It wasn't just generosity, it was cultural insurance, because you never knew when you'd be the one wandering into someone else's firelight with nothing but a frozen nose and a hopeful story. You go to bed that night with warmth, not just in your belly, but in your chest. You're starting to understand the quiet, rugged math of this place. Warmth plus food plus people is not dying. That's the whole formula, and slowly you're becoming part of it. The cold still prowls, the wind still howls, but for now you're not facing it alone. You dream of summer, of grass between your toes and sunlight you can actually feel on your skin, of warm bread, bees buzzing lazily, and the kind of heat that doesn't come from a fire you have to babysit like an angry toddler. But then you wake up and your breath clouds in the air again, and your blanket smells like wet sheep, and winter is still here. It's always here now, clinging to everything like frost on eyelashes. You sit up, flex your fingers to make sure they're still yours, and realise your fire has burned down to coals. You've made it through another night. Barely. But night is where the real battle is fought and lost for most people here. Surviving sleep in a Viking winter is its own daily trial. Every hour that your eyes are closed, the temperature drops, your fire weakens, and the cold presses in through every gap, every seam, every crack in your shelter and your will. So today, you're going to learn how to sleep like a Viking. Not nap, not doze, we're talking full-blown hibernation strategy. Because there's an art to surviving the 12 to 14-hour nights of this season. And believe it or not, it involves more than just a heavy blanket, and hoping your toes are still attached by morning. First rule, you don't sleep alone, not unless you enjoy frostbite and nightmares. Viking families packed into shared spaces during the winter. Husbands, wives, children, sometimes neighbours, everyone slept in the same room, often in the same bed platform, crammed together like pickled herring. And if you're thinking, sounds cosy, let me remind you that no one's bathed in weeks. At least one person is snoring like a war drum, and someone always brings a goat in just for warmth. Your hut, unfortunately, is a solo operation, but that doesn't mean you can't mimic the techniques. You start by rebuilding your fire early, carefully feeding it the driest wood you can find and insulating the pit with stones you've warmed during the day. Then comes the layering. You're already wearing 3 layers, but now you add the goat hide over cloak you borrowed, with approval probably, and wrap yourself like a Viking burrito. Underneath you, dried grass and spruce branches insulate from the frozen ground. You've even arranged stones around the edges of your bedding to radiate heat like a DIY sauna. Still not warm enough? Time for a hot stone trick. You take a smooth river stone from the fire pit, heated but not glowing, because you're not trying to brand yourself and wrap it in cloth before tucking it against your chest. Within minutes it's like cuddling a grumpy forest spirit. But it works. Quirky Viking detail. They often kept livestock inside the longhouse during winter nights, not just for safety, but for warmth. A couple of cows and a few goats could significantly raise the temperature inside a wooden structure. Imagine falling asleep to the sound of snoring humans on one side and a farting cow on the other. Romantic. Still, there's something comforting about shared warmth. Solveig once told you that during particularly brutal winters, people would rotate sleeping positions throughout the night, shifting places, scooting closer to heat sources, always moving just enough to stay warm but not wake fully. Sleep wasn't 8 uninterrupted hours of bliss. It was a tactical maneuver, broken up by fire-stoking shifts and the occasional check for invading drafts. And then there's the dark, not just the absence of light, but the kind that feels alive. You experience it now, wrapped in layers, tearing at the wavering shadows cast by your fire. Darkness in a Viking winter is a different breed. It's thick, it presses, it lingers. Outside, the snow reflects moonlight in strange ways, creating dancing lights that flicker across the walls of your hut like ghosts with poor timing. Which brings us to the cultural layer of sleeping through winter, dreams and spirits. the Norse believed the long nights belonged to things best not seen in daylight. Drauga, the undead spirits of the unburied, nightmares that were considered not just dreams but visitations. And let's not forget the Mara, a spirit said to sit on your chest as you sleep, stealing your breath. That lovely image. It's where the word nightmare comes from. You've heard the stories. You've even seen someone hang an iron amulet above their bed, supposedly to keep the dead away. You don't have one. But you do have a stick figure carved into the wall above your sleeping space, a rough image of Thor, hammer raised. Solveig carved it for you after catching you flinching at a particularly windy night. He watches, she said, even when we can't see. You didn't ask for it, but now you can't sleep without it. Historical fact, the Norse were deeply superstitious, especially in winter. Without modern science to explain frostbite or carbon monoxide poisoning, they often attributed illness and strange deaths to spirits or curses. Amulets, runes and charms were everyday objects, used as both spiritual protection and psychological comfort during long, dangerous nights. Tonight you're tired. Not just physically, though yes, your legs still feel like they're made of frozen meat, but mentally. This place drains you, not with action, but with stillness. The endless cold, the quiet, the sameness of the snow-covered world outside, it presses on the mind like an anchor. You understand now why the Norse told so many stories in winter, why they carved gods into every beam. The silence, if left alone, gets too loud. You add another log to your fire, check the placement of your warm stones, and pull the blanket tight around your neck. You shift your legs slightly to avoid a cold draft snaking through a poorly sealed corner. Then you breathe, slow and deep. The kind of breath that says, okay, another night. I'm ready, and maybe you are. You've got your layers, your fire, your carved god, or your stone of warmth, your gut-stuffed stew slowly digesting. You lie back on your rustling pile of straw and pine needles and let your eyes drift shut. Out there the wind still rages, the darkness presses, but in here there's a flickering orange glow. The cold claws at the walls but doesn't get in, not tonight. You don't sleep deeply, you never do, but you do sleep, and in the Viking winter that's more than most can say. Morning doesn't announce itself, it just sort of creeps in like a guest who's not sure they were invited. You wake up in the same position you fell asleep in, curled under layers of fur and wool, one hand still gripping the warm stone that's long since gone cold. Your back aches, your neck is stiff, and you can feel the familiar chill licking at your face, reminding you that you're not dead, but you're not especially alive either. Outside your hut, the wind has finally calmed. The snow's no longer whipping sideways, and there's a fragile hush over the village, the kind that feels temporary, like nature's just catching its breath before throwing another tantrum. You poke your head out and blink at the light, actual light, pale, watery sun cutting through the clouds like a flickering candle in a cathedral. You almost forget how bright snow can be when it reflects the sky. Your eyes protest. Hard. Today's mission, whether you like it or not, is movement. Not just for chores or warmth, but for navigation. You're going out there. Not far, not on some epic raid or a 2-week trek to trade sealskins, but far enough to risk getting lost in the monochrome maze of snow, rock, and frozen trees. Because the truth is, in the Viking winter, getting lost isn't just possible, it's probable, and fatal. So today's lesson is about orientation, mobility, and not dying while looking for moss. Jorund, the trapper, with the charming limp and the emotional range of an axe handle, greets you at the edge of the village. He doesn't say hello, he just tosses you a fur-wrapped pack and starts walking. You jog to catch up. He's moving fast for someone who walks like he's arguing with gravity. You head toward the tree line, where snow-laden birches bow low and everything looks like it was dipped in powdered sugar and sadness. Within 10 minutes the village is gone, swallowed by the trees. You stop and turn, heart suddenly thumping a little faster. The path back isn't obvious, just snow, white, wind-sculpted, and completely unforgiving. Jorund stops too, and waits for you to catch on. Know where you are? He asks. You shake your head. Good. Learn now. He shows you the basics. Look for landmarks, bent trees, rocks that hold heat and melt snow just slightly faster, old animal tracks, broken branches, the position of the sun, even though it's more of a suggestion than a source of guidance. Best to not go far, he says. Even gods freeze when they get lost. Historical fact time. Norse people had a surprisingly sophisticated sense of geography and direction. They navigated by stars, wind, wave patterns, and, on land, by terrain memory. The sagas speak of people crossing vast, frozen landscapes with nothing but instinct and experience. Of course, they also speak of people walking into snowstorms and being found in spring, so take that as you will. Yoren teaches you to mark your trail. You break branches deliberately, drag a stick behind you, tie strips of cloth to low limbs. Every few minutes you turn around and memorize the path back like it's the only thing standing between you and a cold, dumb death. Because it is. The forest is deceptively quiet. No birdsong. No rustling, just the creak of trees under snow weight and the occasional crash of snow falling from overloaded branches. You flinch every time. Yoren doesn't even blink. Snow ghosts, he mutters once. You can't tell if he's joking. Quirky side detail. Vikings believed in huldufolk, hidden folk, mischievous spirits who lived in rocks and trees and led travellers astray. Some people would carry a token, like a carved bone or an iron nail, just to keep them at bay. You've got a sharp stick and a slightly panicked expression. Not exactly magical defence, but you hope it counts. Midday comes, or at least what passes for it here. The light peaks weakly and then begins to fade again. You stop in a small clearing where Yoren points out a few snow-covered shrubs and mossy rocks. This, he says, is how you know you're not walking in circles. He kicks over a rock, revealing patches of green moss. Grows on the warmer side, he adds, south usually. Not always, but it's something. You break for food, cold meat wrapped in bark and a chunk of hard bread that could double as a weapon. Yoren pulls out a tiny cup of warm broth, poured from a leather pouch. Drink keeps the blood from hiding. You sip. It tastes like bone and salt, but it does wake you up a little. Then it's time to return. But here's the thing, everything's changed. The light is shifted, shadows are longer. Your footsteps from earlier are already gone, covered in wind-blown powder. You hesitate. Yoren watches you. Doesn't help, just watches. You turn slowly, look for your trail markers, the broken branches, the dragged stick line. It's there, faint, like a whisper. You follow it. 10 minutes later, the village fence comes into view, and you exhale like you've been holding your breath for a week. This, you realise, is how people die out here. Not from wolves or starvation or frostbite, though all of that's in the cards, but from walking 5 minutes in the wrong direction and never coming back. Ongoing scholarly debate. Did Norse settlements have designated paths and maps through snowbound areas? Some researchers think they used cairns or stone markers as winter waypoints, especially near the coast or between farms. Others argue they relied solely on oral tradition and experience. Either way, the only guaranteed guide was someone like Yoren, who knew the woods like he knew the lines in his hands. That night, around the fire, you retell your brief journey. People nod, some even listen. You're not exactly impressive yet, but you didn't die, and in Viking winter that's as close to a resume as you're going to get. You sleep harder that night. The exhaustion is different, not from cold or hunger, but from concentration. The kind of mental tightrope walking that comes from realizing you are one misstep away from disappearing forever under the snow, and no one would ever find you until the thaw. Tomorrow you'll learn how to fish under the ice. Because sure, hunting is great when it works, but food from frozen water, that's next level survival. But for now, you're home. You made it back. You're one of the few who wandered and returned. You sleep knowing that. And the cold for tonight lets you be. The lake is silent. Not calm, not peaceful. Silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. A vast sheet of frozen water stretches out before you, smooth and pale like a giant's polished tooth. It doesn't look like something you should walk on, and yet that's exactly what you're about to do. Because apparently today's lesson in not freezing to death involves cutting holes into a solid slab of ice and attempting to pull dinner out of it with a string and a stick. Welcome to ice fishing, Viking edition. Your breath curls in front of you as you approach the shoreline. The snow here has been trampled down into a packed crust by countless boots. Eric is already waiting, squatting next to a hole bored through the ice with a hand-carved auger. He's holding what looks like a miniature spear and staring into the inky blackness below, like it owes him money. He doesn't look up when you arrive. "Don't fall in," he says, which is apparently the full tutorial. You look down. The hole is only about the size of a dinner plate ringed in ice crystals. Inside, nothing. Just dark, swirling water that might as well be a portal to hell. And now you're going to sit here over this void and hope something edible swims by. Fantastic. Here's your setup. A short, stiff rod carved from bone and wood, a line made of animal sinew, and a hook forged from actual iron. That part surprises you, iron just for fishing? But then again, you remember that every tool in winter is sacred. If it feeds you, it's worth its weight in silver. You kneel awkwardly on a thick fur and peer down into your hole. The cold coming off the ice is different. Not like air or wind. It's heavy, like it's pulling heat out of your body. You feel it immediately in your bones. Eric hands you a chunk of dried fish guts to use as bait. It smells like something that died twice. You jab the hook through the chunk, lower the line slowly into the water, and wait, and wait, and wait. That's when Eric decides to talk. "First time I fished," he says, "I fell in. My brother grabbed me by the beard to pull me out. Nearly scalped me, but I lived." You glance at him. His beard does look suspiciously patchy on one side. Historical fact break. Ice fishing was absolutely a Viking winter survival tactic, especially in regions where the sea froze or rivers slowed to a crawl. Using hand drills or axes, they'd cut holes in the ice and fish for cod, trout, or anything that would bite. Some even used spears to jab fish they could spot in the shallows, a skill that required patience and an eye like a hawk with a magnifying glass. You sit there in silence, staring into the abyss, your fingers slowly going numb despite the thick mittens. Eric catches a fish, just like that. Yanks the line, pulls up a wriggling grey creature with bulging eyes and a mouth locked in a permanent frown. He clubs it with a practiced flick of his wrist. It flops once, then stills. He tosses it into a basket without ceremony. You? Nothing. For an hour. You feel the line twitch once and yank too early. Nothing. Then again, you wait. Then pull. Your fish isn't big, it's barely a fish, more like a wet leaf that grew eyes. But Eric grins. Not bad. For a beginner. He doesn't club it. He lets you do it, which feels slightly more personal than you expected. You apologise to the fish under your breath before delivering the fatal blow. Quirky fact of the day. In some coastal communities, Vikings used to warm their feet by sticking them into the bodies of freshly caught fish. Yeah, that's real. Not common practice, more like desperation innovation. But it's the kind of trick that doesn't sound quite as insane once your toes start to feel like frozen carrots. You and Eric pull up 4 more fish between you, enough to count as a modest meal for a small group. He shows you how to clean them right there on the ice, gutting, scraping, and flinging bits to the side where 2 ravens are already waiting. Ravens, always watching, always eating. You wonder briefly if they're pets or just opportunists. Eric offers no comment, but when one of them caws, he mutters, "Thought you'd be bigger again." You don't ask. Here's an ongoing scholarly debate to toss into your icy fishing hole. Were Vikings primarily farmers or fishers? Some argue that despite all the boat law, most Norse people relied on agriculture, barley, livestock, dairy, for their daily needs. Others suggest fishing was equally vital, especially during winter when crops were impossible. The answer, unsurprisingly, is probably yes. They did everything they had to. Fish, farm, hunt, trade, swindle, rinse and repeat. As the sun begins its slow retreat behind the trees, the ice starts to groan beneath your knees. It's subtle, like the sound of a glacier sighing. Eric stands. "That's the lake telling us to leave," he says. You don't argue. You stand, flex your fingers, and help carry the fish back toward the village in a net that leaks meltwater down your leg the entire walk. Back in the longhouse, the fish are already sizzling over a shallow fire pit. Someone stuffed their bellies with herbs, wrapped them in birch bark, and now the scent is filling the smoky space with something that smells like dinner instead of desperation. You sit down beside the fire, warming your fingers, your knees, your face. Solveig hands you a charred, steaming casserole. Inside, your first fish. Crispy on the outside, flaky and white inside. You take a bite. It's amazing. Smoky, salty, with just the right crunch of bark and grit. Survival cuisine at its finest. People eat, people laugh. The ravens from earlier are perched on the roof beam watching. Someone tosses a fish head toward the door and one of them flies down to claim it. You still don't know if they're pets or spirits. No one explains. You fall asleep that night full, warm, and smelling like burnt fish. And when the wind howls outside, you just roll over, Because now you know, even the ice can feed you if you're stubborn enough to sit still and ask nicely. You wake up scratching. Not a polite, dainty scratch, but a full-body, desperate, frantic wiggle under your blanket like something's living in your clothes, which, unfortunately, might actually be true. You sit up in the dark of your hut, shivering and tugging at the collar of your tunic. You're covered in layers. But whatever's crawling on you clearly didn't get the memo that this is your skin and not a buffet. Congratulations, you've unlocked another Viking winter challenge. The itchy, twitchy, skin-crawling joy of living in close quarters with no showers and plenty of parasites. Today's lesson: the icy threats inside the walls. You've made fire, hunted food, fished under ice, but now it's time to battle your newest enemy, filth. You drag yourself out into the frozen morning, scratching as discreetly as you can, and make a beeline for the longhouse. It's already busy. People stirring pots, mending clothes, feeding them goats, and pretending they're not also itching their necks. You're not alone. Solveig catches your eye, raises an eyebrow, and tosses you a handful of something that looks like crushed charcoal mixed with dried herbs. Lice powder, she says. You blink. Lice? She snorts. You thought you'd get through winter without them? Apparently not. You take the powder and rub it into your scalp like shame-flavoured dry shampoo. It stings a little, but within minutes the itchiness fades to something tolerable. You feel about 10% less like a human flea market. Historical fact: Viking hygiene was actually better than most people think. They bathed weekly, a big deal for medieval Europe, and owned grooming tools like tweezers, combs and ear picks. But winter made things complicated. Water froze, laundry turned to boards, and bathing could literally kill you if you caught cold afterward. So when soap and scrubbing weren't options, they used ashes, sand or herbal powders to keep the worst grime at bay. Still, no amount of powder stops the cold season stink. The longhouse smells like sweat, smoke, wet wool and something vaguely like onions that gave up. And you're right in the middle of it, chewing on reheated barley mush and hoping that no one else can smell how long it's been since you changed your underlayers. Quirky survival strategy. In some regions, people wore their underwear inside out after a few days to extend cleanliness. Then backwards, then inside out and backwards. It wasn't so much laundry as a kind of rotating shame ritual. You consider this as you discreetly flip your leggings in the privacy of your hut later, just to see if it helps. But parasites aren't the only enemy creeping inside this season. You're starting to notice other changes. People are quieter, slower. Joran snaps at a kid for stepping too close to the fire. Solveig mutters to herself more often. Even Eric seems withdrawn, sitting for hours by the fire sharpening his axe, not for use, just because. You realise cabin fever is real, not the dramatic hallucinating kind yet, but the slow gnawing kind that wears you down one freezing day at a time. There are no outings, no sunlight, just endless grey, endless chores, and the same 7 faces every day. You miss being bored. You'd give anything to scroll something, even the weird part of YouTube. Anything. Elder Halvard calls a meeting that evening, not because anything urgent is happening, but because people need a reason to gather. They sit in a circle near the hearth, passing around a skin of weak mead and telling stories. Not just old sagas, but gossip, jokes. Someone brings out a bone flute and plays a clumsy tune. You don't even care that it sounds like a goat learning to whistle. It's something. One woman, Ingrid, sharp-eyed and missing 3 fingers, shares a tale about the time she and her sister got snowed in with a sick cow for 6 days. We taught it to play dead so we could feel like gods, she says, deadpan. Everyone laughs, too hard, like maybe that story's closer to true than it should be. Open scholarly debate. How did Viking communities handle long-term winter confinement psychologically? Some researchers argue that their storytelling culture, religious rituals and strong community ties helped mitigate mental decline. Others believe the toll was severe. Depression, aggression, even violence. Just not recorded in sagas meant to glorify. There's no hard data, but sitting in this room, watching people cling to jokes like life preservers, you get it. Solveig pulls you aside after. Keep busy, she warns. Idleness is when shadows get in. You're not sure if she means depression, ghosts, or something worse. Either way, you ask her to teach you something, anything. She grins. Soap, she says. We're making soap. You spend the next hour boiling animal fat with ash and water in a blackened cauldron, stirring slowly with a stick that's seen better decades. It smells horrific, like burned stew and regret, but it feels productive, and that's enough. By the time you return to your hut, your skin still itches a little, your back aches, and your blanket has started to resemble a crime scene in terms of smell. But you've got lice powder, you've got soap, you've got one new joke about a flatulent goat. You're still cold, still tired, but not alone, and in Viking winter that makes all the difference. You don't notice them at first, not really, just a bundle of sticks leaning against your door, then another, placed deliberately under the edge of your window flap. You assume it's just Solveig being passive-aggressive about your kindling collection, until you walk through the village and realise that every doorway has something strange near it. Twigs arranged in little stars, bits of bone strung on thread, feathers hanging from rafters, smudges of ash traced across doorframes in symbols that look like they were drawn by someone dreaming too hard. You ask Halvard about it, and he doesn't blink. The spirits walk in deep winter, he says, like he's talking about the weather. Best not to leave your door open. Right. Today's lesson? You're finally going to meet your invisible roommates, the unseen ones the Vikings feared as much as famine. Because winter in this world doesn't just bring snow and hunger and wolves, it brings them, the ones without names, the ones you keep warm for, whether you mean to or not. Welcome to the world of Viking winter spirits. The air in the village feels different, heavier, and not just from the cold, people speak softer. Fires are lit earlier. There's more smoke than usual, and herbs, sweet and bitter and sharp, are burning in little clay dishes near every threshold. You recognise mugwort, maybe thyme, possibly wormwood, though Solveig won't confirm it. She just mutters, keeps the wrong things out. That night you're invited to a ritual. Not a loud dramatic affair, no dancing, no horned helmets. Just a quiet gathering in the longhouse, the windows covered, the children kept close. The fire burns low and steady, and a bowl of water is placed near the door. For them to see themselves, Halvard explains, so they remember who they were. You're not sure if he's joking. They talk about the Veta, the wights, spirits of the land, the house, the ancestors. Some helpful, others not so much. There's the Nis, a kind of house guardian that can bless your hearth or ruin your life depending on how well you treat it. There's the Draugr, of course, undead things that crawl out of burial mounds during the cold months when the ground is too frozen for proper rest. And the Huldufolk, the hidden folk who walk freely in winter because, as Solveig puts it, they like the quiet. Historical fact, Norse folklore is absolutely packed with spirit lore, especially tied to winter. The colder, darker months were considered thin times, when the line between this world and the next grew fragile. Offerings were made to land spirits at thresholds, meals were set aside for the dead, and charms were hung to ward off those who might slip through. It wasn't religion exactly, it was survival. Spiritual insurance. One by one, the villagers share small stories, nothing dramatic. Just unsettling. A child saw footprints on the roof after a snow with no wind. A man woke to find his tools rearranged in a perfect circle. A girl lost her voice for 3 days after sleeping too close to the door. Joran shares one that makes the room go quiet. My brother left an offering out too late, he says. Forgot it in the snow. Came back in the morning and the meat was gone. But so was the corner of the door frame. He points to a thin scar running down his forearm. House collapsed 2 days later. We don't forget now. You believe him. Quirky custom. Vikings would sometimes smear blood. Animal blood, usually from the Yule sacrifice, on the doorposts of their homes to protect against spirits during midwinter. Not decorative, not symbolic, just practical, in the way that covering yourself in garlic is practical in a vampire movie. It wasn't about looking pious, it was about not being noticed. After the stories, Halvard passes out bundles of herbs tied with red string. You're told to hang it above your door, not to burn it, not to touch it once placed, and definitely not to move it after dark. They hate that, Solveig says. Makes them curious. You lie awake that night, staring at the bundle as it hangs near your hut entrance. It sways slightly, despite the still air. Just wind, you tell yourself, just the creaking of wood. And then you hear it, soft crunching outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, you don't move, your fire hisses, the crunching pauses, then a knock. 1, 2, not frantic, not hard, just polite. You hold your breath, no one should be outside, no one knocks in the dead of night. You wait, eyes wide, muscles tensed. Then, nothing. Just silence again, thick, heavy pressing. You lie there until morning, ears straining, sleep forgotten. When dawn comes, pale and slow, you step outside. There's nothing at your door, but a single feather lies in the snow. Black, long, still warm. You don't ask questions. Scholarly debate intermission. Were these beliefs metaphorical, just ways to explain natural phenomena, or truly spiritual practices? Some historians argue the spirits were just cautionary tales. Others believe these rituals were deeply embedded in Norse life, not as superstition, but as everyday reality. Whatever the case, the fear was real, and fear, in a Viking winter, kept you alive. Later that day, you help hang more charms, carve small protective runes into wooden door frames. You catch Solveig whispering something in Old Norse as she buries a carved bone under the threshold. When you ask her what it means, she shrugs, just telling the house we're still here, so it doesn't forget. That night you leave your own offering outside, just a scrap of meat on a wooden dish, nothing fancy, nothing loud, but respectful. You wake up the next morning to find it gone, and nothing else missing. That's enough. Snow is falling again, not in soft storybook flakes, but in thick, wet clumps that stick to your cloak and melt down the back of your neck. It's the kind of snow that makes sound vanish, no crunching underfoot, no rustling of trees, just a white curtain lowering itself over the world like a funeral shroud. You'd think this would make the village quiet, but it's not today. Today there's yelling. You round the corner of the longhouse just in time to see two men square off, chests puffed, faces red, hands twitching near their belt knives. The snow's still falling around them, gentle and completely indifferent. A few people watch from doorways, not intervening, not quite worried, just waiting. Then someone shouts. A woman, Ingrid, the sharp-tongued one missing 3 fingers, steps in between them and smacks both in the chest with a wet, gloved hand. They scowl, mutter something you don't catch, and stalk off in the opposite directions, dragging their dignity behind them like sleds with broken runners. Welcome to Viking winter warfare, the domestic kind. Today's lesson is not about raids or shield walls or berserker charges. It's about something quieter, pettier, and way more dangerous in a cramped snowbound village. Tension. Because the longer the snow traps you together, the more frayed every nerve gets. And sometimes survival isn't about hunting or fire building. Sometimes it's about not killing the people you live with. Back in the longhouse, Halvard is talking low with Eric. You catch bits and pieces, words like property line, salted meat, daughter, and knife. Apparently the fight outside out had something to do with a pig that wandered off 3 days ago, and a suspicion that it didn't just wander. You settle near the fire, slowly thawing your fingers and listening without listening. The social fabric here is held together by a combination of mutual dependence and fear of exile. You can't just get into a brawl and walk away without consequences. Not in a place where there's only one cookpot and one community store of dried fish. Everyone needs everyone, but that doesn't mean they like each other. Historical fact, Vikings absolutely fought during winter, but most of the time it wasn't dramatic village raids or grand-scale battles. It was skirmishes over resources, grudges, and insults. Winter intensified existing rivalries. Confined together for months, with short days and long memories, people got restless and angry. Sagas mention winter killings as often as they mention winter weddings. Some households even split into factions, and if a fight did turn deadly, that wasn't just a crime, that was a problem, because the body can't be buried, the ground's too hard, so it stays, in a box, in a shed, or under the floorboards, until spring. You can see why people started acting weird. Solveig later tells you about a time 2 brothers fought over inheritance. The younger one stabbed the older in the thigh during a stew dispute. He didn't mean to kill him, but infection did. Their mother kept the body in a sealed cart for 2 months, she says, shrugging like that's just what you do. He started showing up in her dreams, angry. We had to burn the cart. You don't ask her if she means literally or spiritually, maybe both. Quirky fact, some Viking settlements had insult laws. You could be fined for calling someone a coward, a thief, or questioning their masculinity. Words mattered. Reputation was everything. And in a snowbound world where tension simmered for weeks at a time, the wrong joke could spark a blood feud. You're starting to understand that now. Later that afternoon, you're sent to collect kindling from a shared woodpile behind the blacksmith's hut. When you get there, someone's already there. Loki, not the god, but a young man named after him. He's thin, always squinting, and speaks like he's auditioning for a riddle contest. You nod, expecting the usual silence. Instead, he grins. Careful with that bundle, he says. Might be cursed, or just wet, same result. You laugh, sort of. He pauses, then adds, "You know about the feud, right? Which one, may you ask?" "Exactly," he says, and walks off. By nightfall, the village is tense. A second argument breaks out, this one between two women over whose child tracked ash into the stew pot. Ingrid smacks a table and declares that tomorrow there will be a feast to honour the old gods, and if anyone fights, she says, they'll be invited to eat outside, naked. That gets the room laughing, mostly, but the tension is still there, just under the surface, like ice under snow. Scholarly debate alert. Did Viking communities have formal systems for conflict resolution, or was it mostly handled with axes and grudges? Archaeological evidence suggests both. There were legal assemblies, things where disputes could be settled publicly, but in isolated winter settlements, probably less courtroom, more kitchen table politics, and maybe a punch or two. That night, you sleep lightly. Every creak of wood sounds like a footstep. You hear someone pacing outside your home, though you don't know who. Your hut isn't locked. You don't even have a door that locks, just a hanging fur and hope, but no one enters. You think about your place here. You're still the outsider. Still the new one, but you haven't made enemies. Yet. You keep your head down, share what you catch, pass the mead when it's offered. It's not just survival, it's a strategy. Because in Viking winter, staying warm is easy. Staying on good terms, that's the hard part. There's a sound outside your hut this morning that you haven't heard in a while. Grunting, not human, definitely animal, and loud enough to shake loose some frost from your roof. You crawl out, breath already puffing in front of you, and see the source immediately. A massive brown cow is staring at your door like it's considering whether or not to eat it. It's flanked by a younger one, smaller, shaggier, and currently chewing on a length of rope with the dead-eyed calm of something that's been awake longer than you. Solveig appears from the side, swatting the big one on the flank. "Move, Astrid! You're scaring the stranger." You blink. "That's Astrid?" She nods, tying the rope around the post outside your hut. You'll be spending some time together. Today's lesson: animals are the backup heating system, emergency food source, early warning alarm, and closest thing to central companionship you've got. And now they're moving in, literally. Because once the weather gets cold enough that the outhouses freeze shut and the firewood stack disappears faster than good moods at dawn, it's time to do what every Viking household eventually does: invite the livestock indoors. Astrid and her calf, which Solveig affectionately refers to as Idiot, are led into a small side pen that's been hastily reinforced with logs and straw behind your hut. It's not technically inside yet, but the heat from their bodies will warm the shared wall, and eventually, when the next big storm hits, they'll move in properly, which is about as cosy as it sounds. You're handed a pitchfork and pointed toward the hay pile. "You'll muck and feed," Solveig says. "They'll like you better if you talk to them." You try it. "Hi, Astrid." Astrid stares like she's heard worse. Historical fact: Viking homes, especially longhouses, were often divided into two halves, one for humans, one for animals. In the heart of winter, the warmth from cows, goats, pigs, and chickens could mean the difference between comfort and hypothermia. These weren't pets, they were heating devices with hooves, but they were also invaluable as status symbols, labourers, and eventually as food. As you learn to shovel out the steaming mess from Astrid's corner, you notice something strange. She is warm, like a living furnace. The closer you are, the more you thaw. Your gloves steam, your face relaxes. You lean a little too close and she torts in your direction, sending a blast of hot cow breath into your face. It smells like fermented sadness and grass, but you'll take it. Later, Solveig teaches you how to milk. Astrid tolerates you, barely. Her calf butts at your side every time you sit, but eventually you get the rhythm. The milk is warm, slightly sweet and oddly comforting. It will be turned into cheese, boiled into broth, and used in porridge so thick it could serve as roofing material. Quirky detail of the day: Vikings used animal stomachs as containers for making cheese. You'd add rennet, milk, and herbs into the cleaned-out stomach, tie it off, and hang it from the rafters to ferment. You eye Astrid's gut thoughtfully and decide you don't need cheese that badly. After lunch, barley again, now with the luxury of milk, you help check on the rest of the animals. Chickens huddle under baskets to keep their toes from freezing off. A goat named Snorri keeps escaping his pen and following people like an angry cloud with horns. And the pig? No one talks about the pig anymore. It disappeared 3 nights ago, and no one's asked questions. Which brings you to an open, scholarly debate. How dependent were Viking households on animals during the winter? Some evidence suggests families couldn't survive without them, not just for meat and milk, but for trade, dung for fuel, and even companionship. Others believe that in harsher areas, livestock were slaughtered early to avoid wasting winter resources. The truth likely depended on location, food storage, and whether or not Astrid felt like cooperating. The longer you spend around these creatures, the more you understand that they aren't just livestock, they're part of the social ecosystem. People talk to them, name them, bargain with them. Halvard's wife offers the chickens dried berries like bribes. One boy sleeps beside a goat who lets him use its side as a pillow. It's less barnyard and more oddly hairy roommate with poor hygiene. That night you hear movement against the wall, slow rhythmic shifting. At first you think it's wind. But then comes the familiar grunt and a long, rattling exhale. Astrid is lying down, settling in for the night. You're separated only by a foot-thick wall of turf and a few logs, but you feel the warmth radiating through. It's like having a living, snorting heater. You find yourself talking to her, not full conversations, just murmured comments while you stir the fire. You tell her the stew is edible, that your boots are still wet, that Jorund is probably going to break his leg if he keeps walking on the roof. It's ridiculous, but she listens. And when the wind picks up that night, hard and sharp, and your fire dies faster than usual, it's her warmth that keeps your toes from going numb. Not Solveig, not the god, just Astrid, chewing in the dark, unaware that she's now your closest friend. Fringe Belief Corner. Some Viking folktales speak of animals that turn into humans under certain conditions, usually around Yule, when magic is at its most potent. Others believe that certain cows could see spirits or predict death. You don't know if Astrid's magical, but when you whisper a question into the wall and she snorts right after, you're not convinced. By morning, your hut smells like hay, ash, and animal, but it's warm. You step outside to fetch water, and Solveig gives you a long look. You smell like a cow. You grin. Thanks. She rolls her eyes, but her mouth twitches, because in the Viking winter, survival is never glamorous. It's messy, itchy, smelly, and loud, and sometimes it moos. You've developed a new fear. Ice that talks, not literally, though at this point you wouldn't be shocked, but in its own strange language. Groans, cracks, moans that echo through the fjord like something ancient and angry waking up from a nap. Today those sounds are everywhere, bouncing off frozen cliffs and drifting across the stillness like a warning. You're back at the lake. The same one where you ice fished with Eric, except now the ice is thicker, the snow deeper, and the silence even heavier. A group has gathered near the far shore, bundled in furs, tools strapped to their backs. Jorund waves you over and hands you a spear. Not a weapon exactly, but a long pole with a barbed tip, rough-hewn and clearly repaired 12 times. He slaps you on the back hard enough to make you stumble and says, "Time to catch something bigger than a sardine." Today's lesson? Ice fishing was the intro. Now you're learning how to hunt under frozen water. Welcome to net fishing and spear hunting, a more advanced, riskier, and potentially much wetter business. You trudge out onto the ice, the snow muffling your footsteps, but not the unease twisting in your gut. The cold is sharp enough to cut thought. Your fingers ache through your gloves. The only warmth you've got is from the calfskin pouch under your tunic, filled with warm stones and sheer desperation. The group has already carved 2 large holes into the ice, a good 20 feet apart. Between them, they have run a rope under the surface, using long wooden poles with hooks to drag a weighted net beneath. It's clumsy, slow, and unbelievably cold work. Every time someone leans too far over the hole, you brace yourself for a splash and a scream. It hasn't happened yet. Yet. Historical fact. Vikings developed clever systems for fishing under ice. Using stone weights and carefully woven nets, they could trap fish moving sluggishly into the winter cold. Some used spears with detachable barbed heads attached to lines, allowing them to retrieve prey even if it tried to wriggle away. It wasn't sport, it was survival chess, with hypothermia as the penalty for losing. You're handed the net next. It's heavy, soaked and biting cold against your gloves. You feed it under the ice, working slowly with the pole while Jorund shuffles to the second hole to receive it. The rope grows taut. The others begin to pull. For a moment, it's all quiet focus. Then movement. The net twitches, shudders, something's in it. You pull harder, slipping on the slick ice, cursing under your breath. Jorund yells something you don't catch, and the net explodes upward from the hole, flinging a massive fish onto the ice with a wet thunk. It flails, gasping. Someone lunges with a club and ends it in a single, merciful blow. It's not just big, it's huge, longer than your arm, broad as your thigh. With pale, blind-looking eyes and a mouth that could easily take off a toe. Everyone cheers, briefly and with the same kind of energy people use when avoiding frostbite. The fish is tossed onto a sled, quickly packed in snow. Another net is prepped. The whole process begins again. Fringe fact. In certain northern regions, Vikings believed that large, pale fish pulled from deep under the ice were spirits in disguise, beings that had taken the form of fish to spy on or test humans. Some people whispered that killing one could bring bad luck. Others believed it brought protection. Either way, they always ate them. Because priorities, you get the next spear. It's heavier than expected. The barbed head is attached to a looped cord tied to your wrist. Primitive insurance in case the fish dives. You kneel near the second hole, peering into the murky water below. It's like staring into another world, quiet, dark, and full of things that don't belong on land. You wait. Breath shallows, time drips by in cold minutes. Then you see it. A shape, long, gliding. You hold your breath. You strike. The spear pierces the surface with a splash. The line goes taut, and your hands nearly rip off as the thing below thrashes. You lean back, shouting for help, and Jorund grabs the cord. Together you haul it up. A smaller fish, maybe 3 feet long, speared clean through. Not as big as the first, but you got it. Yourself. The others nod in approval. No one claps. Too cold. But the respect is real. You haul the sled back to the village with the others, ice cracking beneath your boots with every step. It's just normal expansion, they tell you. Just the sound of cold playing tricks. You pretend to believe them. Back in the village, the fish are gutted, cleaned, and hung to dry in the smokehouse. You help flay the skin, fingers stiff but focused. The meat is pale, firm, and still steaming from the inside. It smells like brine and snow. Eric cuts off a piece and roasts it quickly over the coals, handing it to you without a word. You eat it with numb hands and a full heart. Open scholarly debate. Were large-scale winter fish hunts common, or were they rare, risky endeavours? Some historians believe regular fishing under ice was too dangerous to sustain in bad winters. Others argue the Norse were simply too stubborn to let a little ice stop them, especially near the coast. Archaeological remains suggest both inland and coastal communities relied heavily on fish to get through the coldest months. Salted, smoked, or simply buried in snow, fish kept them fed when everything else disappeared. That night, you clean your spear with care. The barbs glint in the firelight like little fangs. You hang it by your door, not as a weapon, but as a trophy. You earned this. You faced the ice, the dark, the risk, and you came back with dinner. Outside, the lake groans again, louder this time. A long, yawning crack that rolls like thunder across the white. You stare toward it, heart ticking faster. Just ice shifting, probably. You bank your fire, wrap your blanket tighter, and for the first time in days you dream of swimming. Not drowning, not freezing, but gliding beneath the ice, weightless and calm, just passing through. You've been warned about midwinter since the first snowflake hit the ground. Not by name, not with some grand speech, but in side glances and half-phrases. We'll see how you feel by midwinter, Solveig once muttered to her while hacking a frozen turnip. If you're still breathing, that is. Jorund grunted something about ghost-like nights and waking dreams. Even Halvard, ever the practical one, only said, "It's when the world starts listening." Well, the day has come, or more accurately, the longest night has come. Midwinter, Jolablot, the darkest stretch of the year. And the closest thing the Vikings had to both Christmas and a spiritual reset button. You wake up to silence. Not the usual sleepy quiet, but a full-on hush, like the land itself is holding its breath. Even the snow seems to have stopped falling. You step outside your hut and blink. The sky is a pale bruise, not quite dawn, not quite night, smeared with low clouds and the faintest hint of colour. There's movement all around the village, people busy, focused, no idle chatter, fires being tended. Animals groomed, children scrubbed within an inch of their lives. You're halfway through wondering what's going on before Solveig tosses you a bundle of pine branches. "Put these over your doorway," she says. "Keep out the dead." Right, casual. You follow instructions, naturally, because today has that strange ritual buzz to it. Every house is being decorated, not with garlands and jingles, but with symbols. Bits of iron nailed into wood, clusters of dried herbs and berries, bones polished and carved with runes, hanging from string. There's food being prepared in quantities you haven't seen since before the snow fell hard. Stew, yes, but also bread. Real bread. Round loaves baked on stones and dusted with ash and salt. You're even handed a mug of mead at breakfast. Nobody explains, but no one has to. This is Yule, the winter feast, the sun's lowest point. A time for sacrifice, remembrance, stories, and a healthy amount of fear. Historical fact, Jólablot was the ancient Norse midwinter festival, honouring the gods, the ancestors, and the turning of the sun. It involved sacrifices, animal mostly, and a feast meant to outlast the darkness. The blot part literally means sacrifice, and it was considered a sacred obligation. If you didn't offer enough, the gods, or worse, the dead, might not see you through the rest of the season. You're pulled into the preparations whether you like it or not. Solveig hands you a knife and points to a pen. Inside, a goat stares back at you, chewing with absolutely no idea what's coming. It's not Astrid, not even Idiot, just a shaggy, thick-horned male with a death sentence hanging from his neck. You hesitate. You don't have to kill it, she says gently, but you have to see it. So you do. You watch as Halvard performs the sacrifice. It's quick, respectful, a clean cut across the throat, a muttered prayer. The blood is caught in a carved bowl and mixed with something, grain maybe, or mead. Then it's poured around the threshold of the longhouse. To keep what's ours inside, he says, and what's not outside. Quirky belief check. Blood sacrifices during Jol weren't just for the gods, they were for the land spirits, the ancestors, even the house itself. The Norse believed that homes could wake up in winter, especially during midwinter. If they weren't fed, if they weren't honoured, they might turn against the people living in them. So yes, your walls might be silently judging you. Fun. As the day slips into night, hard to tell where one ends and the other begins, you find yourself in the longhouse. It's packed, smoky, full of warmth, sound, and the kind of energy that only comes when people are both afraid and celebrating. The meat is cooking, the mead is flowing. Someone starts to drum, rhythm steady, slow, like a heartbeat. Then the stories begin, not the cheerful kind. These are dark tales. Ghosts in the snow, a jarl cursed to wander forever, a woman who went to sleep on Midwinter Eve and woke up blind because she forgot to light a candle for her grandmother. No one interrupts. Even the children are silent, wide-eyed and pale in the firelight. You're invited to speak. You hesitate. Then slowly you tell a story. Not yours, but something half-remembered from home. A tale about getting lost in a forest and being guided out by a creature that might have been a dog or a wolf or something else entirely. They listen. Even Solveig leans in. When you finish, there's a beat of silence. Then a nod. It's enough. Open scholarly debate. Was Jol primarily a religious festival, or a communal survival strategy with spiritual flair? Some historians argue that it was mostly about morale, eating well, reinforcing bonds, reminding everyone they're still alive. Others emphasize the sacred rituals, the sacrifices, the belief that this night mattered. Either way, it worked. People made it to spring, that's proof enough. Later you step outside, the firelight behind you spills in a warm arc across the snow, but everything else is darkness. Real darkness. No moon tonight, no stars, just the endless hush of winter and the weight of the longest night pressing on your shoulders. You look up, and there it is, faint ripple in the sky, pale green, then purple, then stronger, the aurora. You've heard about them, but seeing it? The lights dance across the sky like slow fire, twisting, flickering, silent and alive. The others step outside one by one, until the whole village is standing together, necks craned, mouths open. No one says a word, because this is what they're waiting for. The moment when the world leans back from the edge, when the gods whisper, "You're still here," when the sky sings just loud enough to drown out the fear for one night. You stay until your neck aches and your face burns from the cold. Then you head back in, curl under your furs and close your eyes to dreams of green fire and blood-warmed stone. The night is long, but it won't last forever. Morning arrives like a shy apology, just the barest glow on the snow, as if the sun is cautiously peeking in to see if the chaos is over. The sky is clear for once, no storms, no bruised clouds, just pale blue stretching above a world glazed in ice. But the air isn't warmer. If anything, it feels jours, more brittle, as if the cold has refined itself overnight into something personal. You move slowly, still sore from the Jol feast, still processing what you saw, the blood, the stories, the aurora like a divine thread unravelling across the stars. The village is quiet today, not in a bad way. It's a kind of sacred quiet. People speak softly, children are oddly obedient. Even Astrid the cow seems more contemplative than usual. It's the morning after the longest night. The morning after the turn, and now comes the hardest stretch. Because here's the truth they didn't spell out at the start. Midwinter doesn't mean you've made it. It just means there's more winter behind you than ahead. The darkness lingers, the sun returns in slivers. But it's not over, not even close. Today you experience the other side of the long night, the aftermath. The heavy creaking transition back into routine. You've celebrated. You've sacrificed. You've survived so far. Now it's time to endure. You help clean up the longhouse, brushing ash and goat hair into the corners, scrubbing blood from stone with melted snow and straw. The smell of roasted meat still lingers, comforting and cloying at once. Someone left an offering on the hearth overnight. Dried apples and a twist of bread, now hardened into a little fossil of faith. Solveig finds you there, staring into the embers, and sits beside you with a bowl of broth. "Still feel it?" she asks. You nod. "Never really goes away," she says. "That night lives in your bones." Historical fact, after Jol Viking communities didn't immediately spring back into action. Winter remained a daily struggle, and while the festival marked a spiritual milestone, there were still weeks, sometimes months, of cold, hunger, and darkness to battle. What changed wasn't the weather, it was the mindset. Now the people knew they could make it. You step outside later to gather ice from the river's edge. Water is harder to find now, most of the streams are locked solid, and snow has to be melted in large pots over constant flame. You chop carefully with an iron blade, the chunks ringing like glass as they break. Your breath fogs and settles on your scarf, freezing there like lace. The sky above is strange, pale but endless, and empty. No birds, no insects, just silence and ice. The sun climbs barely above the trees and it immediately begins falling again. Maybe 2 hours of weak daylight, if that. You blink and it's already fading. You head back to the village with a bucket of ice clinking like coins, and pass a group of elders gathered around a rock. They're not sitting or speaking, just watching the horizon. You pause. One of them, the oldest by far, gestures you over and points. "You see that?" he says, his voice like parchment tearing. "That's the sun's first promise." You squint. There's a faint gold smear above the hills, not impressive, but it's something. "Every day a little higher," he murmurs. "Every day a little longer." You nod slowly. He's right. You hadn't noticed. The days are growing, barely, but still. Quirky seasonal and custom. Vikings sometimes track the sun's progress after midwinter by marking lines in the snow, watching where the sunrise touched a certain tree or stone. It wasn't just ritual, it was reassurance. A physical reminder that the world hadn't frozen forever. That spring would eventually limp its way back. Later that evening, Solveig catches you staring at your hands. They're cracked, dry, red with cold. She brings you a small bowl of animal fat mixed with herbs and ash. "Rub this in," she says, "every night. Pretend you care about yourself." You do. It helps. The smell is not great, like tallow and pine, and it's a little bit of old stew, but it's healing. Your hands soften. Your knuckles stop splitting open every time you lift something. That night, the fire burns low. You sit beside it and carve a piece of driftwood into a tiny figure. You don't know why, you're not a craftsman, but it feels right. You carve a little face, a cloak, a sword. Maybe it's Thor, maybe it's just someone getting through it. You place the figure near the door. No one asks what it is. No one laughs. Because everyone here understands what it means to hold on to small things in a long winter. Scholarly debate time. How did Norse people really cope with the psychological toll of the dark months? Some scholars believe oral storytelling and shared myth served as psychological anchors. Others argue that the structure of chores, rituals, and festivals provided just enough rhythm to keep people from unraveling. There's no clear answer, but the emotional endurance required was massive. That night you lie awake, not afraid but alert. The long night has passed, yes, but the hunger isn't gone. The storms will return, the sickness still lingers. The woods are still full of ghosts, both real and imagined. But now you have something else. You've seen the worst it has to offer, and you're still here. The fire flickers, your hut creaks, Astrid snores softly behind the wall. You close your eyes and let the world turn. You don't know what day it is, not really. The calendar gave up weeks ago, buried under snow and smoke and the long sagging hours between dusk and not quite dawn. Every day feels the same now. Wake up cold, eat something grey, fix something broken, stoke a fire, repeat. It's not that the days are bad, it's that they blur, like watercolours on wet parchment. You've entered the true grind of winter, when surviving means doing the same things over and over again, and trying not to go completely feral in the process. So today, you're learning the ancient Viking art of keeping busy without going insane. Your first task? Whittling. Yes, really. Solveig dumps a small pile of wood shavings in your lap and hands you a blunt little blade that wouldn't scare a fish. Figure it out, she says, better than chewing on your own fingers. You stare at the wood. It's just a stick. But you start anyway, carving not with any real plan, but just to move. Shave, rotate, shave. The blade slices slivers that curl like tiny feathers. It's almost soothing. Within an hour, your lap is a mess and your stick looks vaguely like a horse. Or a deformed dog. Maybe a cursed seal. But it's something. You show Solveig. She blinks. It's hideous, she says. Make another. So you do. Historical fact. The Norse were master craftsmen, not just because they were talented, but because long winters demanded it. With months of indoor time, they carved, sewed, wove, and repaired everything. Spoons, bowls, combs, jewellery, even chest-like game pieces. A Viking without a hobby wasn't romantic or stoic. They were dangerous. Or worse, annoying. Later, you join a small group repairing fishing nets. The room smells like old water and bone glue. The net is stretched taut across two wooden frames, and you're shown how to thread sinew through broken patches, tying knots that look like miniature nooses. It's meticulous work, the kind that turns your fingers stiff and sore. But you find yourself falling into a knot, pull, loop. One man hums a low tune while he works, almost like a lullaby. No one talks, you just mend. After lunch, barley soup. Again, you're taught the basics of rune carving. This is not the flashy kind you see in fantasy books. There's no magic glowing glyphs, just careful etching into wood or bone, using angular shapes designed to be carved with a knife. You trace each rune with your fingertip before carving, trying to memorize its shape and its meaning. Feihu, cattle, wealth, algiz, elk, protection, rado, journey, movement. Solveig sees your work and nods. Good enough not to anger the gods, she says. Barely. You carve a small set of runes onto the handle of your knife, not because you're religious, just because it feels right, like marking time, like saying, I was here, I existed, even in the snow, even when the days all felt the same. Quirky, historical hobby corner. Vikings played board games to pass the time. One popular game was Hnefatafl, a strategy game sort of like Viking chess, where one player's goal is to escape the board while the other tries to trap them. The pieces were carved from bone, antler, and even amber. Some say it wasn't just entertainment, it was training, teaching tactics for real life. Or maybe it was just a way to avoid strangling your neighbour out of boredom. That evening, you're invited to join a game. The board is scratched into a slab of wood, and the pieces are mismatched. One made from an old knucklebone, another from smooth driftwood. You lose repeatedly, but no one mocks you. Everyone's just grateful to do something that doesn't involve chopping wood or shoveling dung. Halvard tells a story while you play, a long, winding saga about a jarl who outwitted a troll by challenging it to a riddle contest. The punchline? The troll exploded. You're not sure if that's metaphor or wishful thinking, but the way people laugh, you think maybe they've heard it 1,000 times. And that's the point. the ritual of it, the telling, the knowing what comes next. Open scholarly debate. Was Norse storytelling mostly oral tradition, or did winter bring out more personal imaginative tales? Some argue that the sagas we know are only the big stories, the epics, but in the dead of winter there were likely endless small stories passed around fire pits. Ghost tales, jokes, family myths, none of them written. All of them essential. Before bed you sit near the fire with Solveig and the others, working on small repairs. A tunic with torn seams. A cracked spoon handle is nothing fancy, but every stitch, every fix is a little anchor. Something to hold on to. Astrid groans on the other side of the wall, shifting her bulk. You talk to her now, nightly. She doesn't answer, but she doesn't walk away either. Tonight you tell her about the misshapen horse you carved, and the rune you accidentally inverted. Hope that doesn't summon anything, you whisper, unless it's warm and brings cheese. She snorts. You sleep deeply, for once. Not because you're warm, your toes are still frozen, not because you're safe. There's still a storm brewing to the north, but because your hands are sore from work, your head is full of stories, your pockets are full of splinters, and for one day at least you didn't feel the weight of time pressing down. You were busy, and in Viking winter busy is sacred. The baby's crying again. It's the sharp nasal kind, the kind that slices through sleep like a bone knife and lingers long after it stops. You're not the parent, obviously, but in a one-room longhouse with 30 people, crying belongs to everyone. There's no such thing as privacy here, not during winter, not when you all sleep within 10 feet of each other, wrapped in furs and body heat, breathing the same thick, smoke-soaked air. You roll over, pull your blanket tighter, and try to ignore it. But the sound keeps drilling. You peek through the fur flap into the longhouse and see the mother, young, red-eyed, holding the baby with one hand and stirring a pot with the other. No one offers to help, not out of cruelty, just because they're all too tired, too sore, too busy trying not to fall apart themselves. Today's lesson isn't about chopping wood or gutting fish. Today's lesson is about vulnerability. The hard truth of Viking winter. Some of you will make it and some of you won't, and everyone knows exactly who's at risk. The baby, of course. Infants don't do well in sub-zero temperatures. Then there's the old man in the far corner, coughing deep and wet, wrapped in more blankets than anyone else. And then the thin woman who used to laugh loudly now barely speaks. She's lost weight. You don't see her eat much anymore. Nobody talks about it, but everyone knows. You step outside to clear your head and get a lungful of air that isn't saturated with smoke and despair. The sky's pale, the wind light but biting. You pass Jorund sitting near the smokehouse, sharpening a knife he hasn't used in weeks. He watches you with that same unreadable squint. Long winter, he says. You nod. Longer for some. Inside the longhouse, a quiet hierarchy has begun to form. Those who are strong, who can work, who can haul and chop and hunt, they get the better spots near the fire. Not officially, not maliciously, just naturally, like gravity. The weakest get the corners, far from the warmth near the drafts or the edges of survival. Historical fact, Norse society placed strong value on the community, but also had a stark realism about survival. When resources dwindled, families had to make hard choices. There are recorded cases, though rare, of exposure, where the infirm or elderly were left outside to die when there wasn't enough food. It wasn't murder. It was math. You help the young mother carry water from the frozen stream. Her name is Yrsa. She's barely older than you and looks like she hasn't slept in a month. The baby, bundled in so many layers it resembles a turnip, wails the entire time. Yrsa doesn't flinch. You ask her how she's holding up. She just shrugs. He sleeps better when it's warm, but we only get warm after dinner. Later you ask Solveig about it, about how people make decisions when there's not enough of anything. She sighs and gestures to the roof. See that beam? You nod. That's how many people this house can hold before the smoke doesn't rise right. Too many of them, and we all choke. You stare at it. It's just a beam. But now it has a number. You don't ask what happens when that number's passed. Fringe fact. Some Norse legends tell of snow wives, spirits of women who froze to death in the woods, then returned to guide or curse others. One tale speaks of a snow wife who appears at night and touches the faces of sleeping children. If the child is warm, she smiles. If not, she takes them. You remember that story when you wake one morning to find the old man in the corner hasn't stirred. Halvard checks him. No breath. no sound, just stillness. There's no ceremony. He's wrapped in wool, lifted gently, and taken to a storage hut where the bodies wait for the thaw. You help carry him. It doesn't feel noble. It just feels necessary. That night no one eats more. No one says they're glad there's extra stew, but it's there, and the silence around the fire is heavier than usual. Open scholarly debate. Did Viking settlements have formal rules about who ate first, who got what, and how to distribute resources in a crisis? Some evidence suggests that jarls and elders made these decisions, but others argue that each household developed its own code, based on relationships, strength, and quiet deals. There are no clear records, just hints, bones with teeth marks, smaller portions in graves. Later that week, you notice the thin woman isn't in the longhouse. You find her outside, sitting in the snow, eyes open, blank. You call her name. She doesn't answer. Solveig arrives, crouches beside her, and gently takes her hand. She lost her brother last winter, she explains. Some people grieve slowly, some just stop. Together, you help her inside, you give her the warmest place by the fire. You share your stew even though it means going a little hungry. No one comments, no one objects. The next morning she stirs her own soup now, and you feel something ease in your chest. This is how it works, how they survive, not through grand gestures, but small mercies, shared bowls, quiet kindness. No one speaks of heroism, they just help when they can, and hope someone will help them when their time comes. You sleep that night curled closer to the fire than usual, not for warmth, but because the darkness feels closer than usual, like it's watching, waiting, counting heads. Astrid shifts behind the wall, snorts and settles again. You whisper a thank you to no one in particular, not because you're religious, because you're still alive, and that's starting to feel like enough. Snow is falling again, but this time it's the kind you're used to. Light, dry flakes that drift, rather than crash, like ash from a slow-burning fire. It sparkles when the sun, yes, actual sun, glances across it, casting long blue shadows and golden gleams that make the whole village look briefly like something out of a dream. The air is still bitter. Your toes still numb, but for the first time in what feels like a century, the world doesn't look quite so dead, which is probably why Halvard decides it's time for trade. You don't think much of it when he pulls out his old fur-lined boots and a heavy wool cloak embroidered with runes. But then he calls for Solveig, Jorund, and 3 others, and that's when you realise this isn't just a stroll to the neighbours, it's a journey. You've heard whispers about other villages before. Places across the fjord, tucked in deeper woods or scattered along the coast. Some are only a half-day's walk if the snow's light. Others take 2 days and a fair amount of prayer. Trade happens year-round, but in winter, it's rare, risky, usually reserved for when supplies run low, or when someone has something too valuable to wait for spring. Today it's salt. You have a little, and the next village has more. You also hear talk of dried fish, preserved apples, and, allegedly, soapstone beads. Solveig smirks at the idea like it's a rumour from another world. We'll see, she says. They promised beads last year, gave us dried bark instead. You're invited to go, more like voluntold, but who's keeping track? You wrap yourself in every layer you own, plus a new pair of mittens so stiff with goat grease they could probably survive a fire. You're handed a sled with wooden runners, tied with leather ropes and covered in furs. On it, a bundle of cured hides, a pouch of smoked herring, and 3 carved bowls. That's your contribution. Halvard leads. Jorund follows with a spear and a face that says he'd rather be punched than make small talk. Solveig checks her boots twice and tightens her belt like she's preparing for battle. You bring up the rear, trying not to trip over your own sled rope. The world outside the village is different now, still hostile, sure, still capable of ending you in one wrong step. But with the sunlight slanting between trees and the sky, finally offering something other than despair, it almost feels fair. You travel in silence at first, the sleds hissing softly across the snow, your breath clouding and curling like smoke from moving chimneys. Historical fact, winter trade routes were real and essential. Vikings used sleds, skis, and even ice skates made from bone to travel between settlements. They carried goods like salt, fish, honey, furs, carved tools, and even small livestock. These routes were dangerous but vital, alliances depended on them, and so did survival. By mid-morning you pass a frozen stream, its surface clear enough to see fish gliding underneath. Jorund stops to watch. Still moving, he mutters, even when we're not. You're not sure if he's talking about the fish, or something else. Around midday, you stop for food. Dry bread, cold meat. A sip of honeyed water passed from a skin. You eat quickly, standing, eyes scanning the tree line. The forest is quiet. Too quiet. Not in the storybook way, but in the something's watching way. Solveig seems to feel it too. Keep moving, she says, and no one argues. The snow deepens as you go, and the sled becomes harder to pull. Your legs ache. Your scarf has frozen solid around your mouth. But just as your resolve begins to waver, you hear it, the distant clink of iron. A bell maybe, then voices, and then like a dream, another village. It's smaller. 3 long houses, 2 huts, smoke rises from the chimneys. A woman in a red hood waves as you approach, and Halvard raises his hand in return. There are no greetings, not at first, just silent nods. Tired faces, mutual understanding. You're all just trying to make it. Inside one of the longhouses, the trade begins. Quiet negotiations, item after item laid on a central table, fish for leather, salt for wool, one of your carved bowls for a tiny glass bead. You stare at it for a moment. It's green. Cracked. Probably useless. But it shines, and that's enough. Quirky winter tradition. In some Norse communities, small shiny objects, beads, bits of polished bone, tiny mirrors, were traded not for their usefulness, but for morale. Something beautiful in the middle of endless grey. A reminder that not everything had frozen. While the adults argue over the value of your goat-hide mittens, you wander the edge of the hall. There's a child here, not much older than 10, carving what looks like a bird from driftwood. You compliment it. He shrugs. It's not done, he says, then he hands it to you, just like that. Yours. You're stunned. You thank him awkwardly, and he just grins, revealing 2 missing teeth and a face streaked with soot. Trade complete, the group prepares to return. You're heavier now, not just with salt and food, but with possibility. With the proof that there's more out there. That life, while fragile, is still moving in the world. Open scholarly debate. Did Viking winter trade lead to political alliances, or was it more transactional and practical? Some argue that gifting and trading during the hard months helped bind communities together, creating webs of support that stretched across fjords and mountains. Others believe it was simple commerce. Either way, the social impact was undeniable. On the way back, you walk lighter, even with the extra weight. You keep glancing at the little bird in your pocket, running your thumb over its rough wings. You don't know why it means so much, but it does. As your village comes back into view, the firelight flickering in the distance like a star you never knew to wish for, you realise you've done more than trade. You've connected. You've reminded yourself that you're not alone on this frozen chessboard of survival. Someone else, somewhere else, is pulling their own sled. You step back into your hut that night, colder than ever. But you feel a little warmer inside. There's something tied to your door. At first, you think it's just another bundle of kindling or maybe some half-frozen laundry someone dumped in the wrong place. But when you step closer, you realise it's a carefully knotted piece of straw rope, twisted into a looping symbol you don't recognise. It's bound with red thread, dyed, not blood, and tucked into the knot is a smooth river stone, etched with what might be a rune, or just a very determined scratch. Solveig walks by, sees you holding it, and stops. Someone thinks you need protection, she says matter of fact. From what? She shrugs. Everything. Nothing. Depends who you are. She keeps walking. Right. Good talk. You bring the charm inside and set it gently near your sleeping mat. Whether it's magic or just folk craft, you feel like throwing it out would be a very bad idea. It's not the first strange token you've seen lately. After the Jol Festival, the entire village seems to have collectively remembered that there are things out there, unseen, unkind, and possibly interested in stealing your soul, your goats, or both. So now, everywhere you look, there are amulets, bones with holes drilled through them, tiny bags of herbs strung over doors, feathers dipped in pitch and nailed to rafters. Someone even carved a runestone and planted it upright beside the well. It leans slightly, like it's judging you. Today's lesson is all about Viking supernatural backup plans. Not prayers, not rituals, not temple sacrifices, but something older. Personal magic. The kind of protection you make with your own hands when the gods are too busy or too indifferent. You begin with runes. Halvard gives you a flat piece of birch bark and a bone pick. Write something that matters, he says, but only if you mean it. You think. Then carve 3 simple runes. Algiz for protection, Ansus for wisdom, and a ruse for strength. Solveig peers over your shoulder and nods. Good start, she says. Let's just hope the spirits can read your handwriting. You tie the bark into a cord and hang it from your neck. It feels stupid for the first few hours, like wearing a name tag to a party where everyone speaks ghost. But later, when the wind picks up and the longhouse door bangs open by itself for the third time, you find yourself gripping it. Historical fact, the Norse believe strongly in Galder, magic spoken aloud, and in the power of runes to protect, guide, and bind. These weren't passive decorations. They were functional symbols etched into weapons, tools, homes, and even skin. Some runes were carved for healing, others for travel, and some, like yours, just to keep the worst things from getting in. Solveig also shows you how to make blessing bundles, small pouches filled with herbs, feathers, stones, and other symbolic materials. You sew yours with stiff fingers, stuff it with juniper, moss, and a single goat's tooth. Why the tooth? You'll know when you need it, Solveig says cryptically. You begin to notice that almost everyone has their own charms. Joran carries a tiny hammer carved from bone, tied to his belt with a red string. Ursa, the young mother, keeps a pouch of dried flowers near the baby's cradle. Ingrid, naturally, has a necklace made entirely of tiny bones. Just Sparrow, she says with a smile that makes you question how she got them. That night, someone paints a rune on your door with charcoal and fat. You don't see who, but you recognize it. Ehwaz, the rune of resilience and death. A bit intense for a bedtime symbol, but honestly, not inaccurate. You thank the darkness, just in case it's listening. Quirky survival charm. Some Norse believe placing a sharpened iron knife under your bed would keep night spirits away. Others swore by bowls of water at the foot of the bed, so wandering spirits could see their reflection and leave you alone. You try both, you sleep better. Coincidence? No one dares say. Still, there's an undercurrent of unease you can't ignore. One morning you find one of the chickens dead. No signs of injury, just cold and still. The others are restless, feathers puffed and twitchy. Astrid won't eat. Solveig burns herbs near the pen and mutters something under her breath that sounds very old. Later that day, a girl from the village slips on the ice and breaks her arm. Clean fracture. But everyone goes quiet. It's the third injury this week. Ingrid mutters about bad air. Joran sharpens his knife without saying a word. Scholarly debate moment. Were Viking-era Norse people truly superstitious, or simply responding to real dangers in a symbolic way? Some historians argue that the use of charms and protective rituals was just a way to cope with a chaotic, hostile world. Spiritual logic for physical dangers. Others suggest they believed completely that the boundary between seen and unseen wasn't metaphorical, it was literal. Either way, you keep your charm close. At night, the air feels heavier, not colder, just full. You hear noises that might be snow shifting, or something walking. Someone swears they saw a cat move in behind the smokehouse. Another claims their fire went out all at once. You listen, you don't comment, you add another rune to your door just in case. And when Solveig hands you a necklace made from knotted wool and tiny stones, you put it on without question. She doesn't explain what it does. She just says, wear it until the thaw. You do. Because maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's the only thing standing between you and whatever's out there. Just beyond the firelight, waiting. It starts with a scream. Not a long, drawn-out theatrical one. The kind you hear in sagas when someone falls in battle, or gives birth to twins while a storm rages outside. No, this is shorter. Sharper. The kind of sound that snaps you upright from a dead sleep and leaves your heart galloping in your chest before your brain can catch up. You stumble out of your hut into pre-dawn dark, breath curling like smoke. Half wrapped in furs and clutching your knife out of pure instinct. Others are already there, torches flaring, shadows bobbing along the snow, voices rising. You push through the crowd toward the longhouse and find Solveig kneeling over someone, blood on the snow, blood on her hands, and Joran standing nearby, expression flat but eyes too wide. The man on the ground is Harek. You've seen him around, big red beard, louder than necessary, always trying to trade smoked fish for mead. Now he's gasping, gripping his thigh, blood pouring through his fingers like someone opened a faucet. Solveig shouts for cloth. Ingrid swears under her breath and tears the lining from her cloak. It's bad, bone deep, ugly. What happened? Someone asks. He tried to take food from the root cellar, Joran says. I told him no. And so you stabbed him. He tried to stab me. No one moves. This is what they warned you about, not with words, but in every glance, every measured scoop of porridge, every silent calculation of what's left. The season is turning, the meat is dwindling, the darkness is lingering longer than it should, and now the village's balance, so fragile, so careful, is cracking. Welcome to the test of the Jarls, not actual Jarls, not the noblemen in golden helmets who ride into battle on horses bred for war. Here, Jarl just means whoever holds the reins when the sleigh's going off a cliff. And in winter, leadership isn't decided by vote or birthright, or beard length. It's decided by who keeps people alive, and whether anyone else thinks they can do it better. Historical fact: Viking communities in winter weren't democracies, but they weren't dictatorships either. Leaders held power through respect, fear, or force. A chieftain who failed to protect his people, especially during the cold months, could be replaced. Peacefully sometimes, violently often. Halvard has been the village's leader since you arrived. Steady, silent, slow to speak but sharp when he does. He's the kind of man who carries authority like a cloak. But now, as the crowd murmurs and people glance sideways at the blood pooling in the snow, you see the shift. People are watching him, waiting. Will he punish Jorund? Exile him? Praise him for defending the supplies? He doesn't speak for a long time. Then he kneels beside Harek, presses a hand to the wound and looks up. "Get him inside," he says. "We'll bind it. Feed him." But the next time someone reaches for what's not theirs, they lose a hand, not a leg. It's fair, but not friendly, and no one argues. You help carry Harek inside. He's pale, teeth clenched, muttering curses under his breath. Ingrid mixes a poultice from pine sap and crushed bark. Jorund disappears before anyone thinks to question whether this really was self-defense. That night the longhouse feels colder. Not physically, just colder. Less laughter. More eyes darting. You see people counting, mentally, every time someone eats. You catch two boys whispering near the corner of the storage shed. And Halvard, he doesn't sit near the fire anymore. He keeps watch by the door, spear across his lap, face unreadable, open scholarly debate. Did power shift in Norse communities during long winters? Some researchers suggest that crises created opportunities. Those who could provide, lead, or intimidate might rise quickly. Others argue that hierarchy stayed firm unless completely disrupted. What's clear is that winter strained not just food and firewood, but leadership itself. You start to notice other signs. A man sharpens a blade twice as long as any you've seen him carry before. Someone's goat goes missing, and no one investigates. A child cries in the night, and no one moves to comfort them. Tension is a smell now, not like smoke or sweat, but like something metallic. Like the moment before lightning, Solveig takes you aside. "You need to be careful now," she says. "Of what?" "Of everything." She shows you how to walk silently in snow, how to listen for breath behind you, how to keep your knife warm in your boot so it doesn't freeze to your leg. She teaches you how to feel a doorframe for runes scratched into the wood, and how to interpret what they mean. If you see 3 marks down and 1 across, don't enter. It means not safe, or sometimes goat inside. Same difference. Quirky survival insight. Some Norse families mark their doorposts in winter with secret signs. Not just magical ones, but messages. Codes to family, warnings to outsiders. A scratch here, a smear of blood there. In a season where people became desperate, sometimes the only defense was a quiet signal and someone paying attention. You start sleeping with a spear by your mat. Not because you're afraid. Okay, because you're afraid. But also because you know now, the cold isn't the only thing that kills. Leadership means keeping the peace, yes. But sometimes peace is just the pause between storms, and winter is full of storms. You wake to the sound of singing. Not the eerie kind that sometimes floats across the snow and makes you question if someone's gone mad. Or worse, has company. No, this is different. Laughter tucked into melody. Voices raised not in mourning or warning, but in celebration. Real, genuine singing. It takes you a minute to remember what day it is. Today is the Feast of Thawing Hope. Not its official name, if it even has one, but that's what Solveig calls it. She smiles a little when she says it, like it's a joke only she gets. "When we pretend spring is coming," she told you yesterday, while stuffing wild onions into a pot like they owed her money, even though it isn't. It's a feast built on lies, or, if you're feeling generous, faith. The idea is simple. You gather whatever's left, cook the best meal you can with it, and thank the gods for not killing you yet. It's part sacrifice, part celebration, part we have to eat this before it moulds anyway. But more than anything, it's psychological. A reset. A trick you play on yourself and each other. Because if you can party in February, you can probably make it to March. You dress carefully even though your clothes still smell like goat and your boots are barely holding together. You wash your face in melted snow, comb your hair with a bone pick. Someone's even laid a pine branch near your door. Fragrant, green, to green. And wildly optimistic. Inside the longhouse, people are already gathering. There's warmth, not just from the fire, but from mood, laughter. Halvard is telling a story with actual gestures. Ingrid has baked something flat and smoky and possibly edible. Someone brought out a clay flute and is tooting through it like a goose with performance anxiety. It's awful. No one cares. Historical fact, Viking mid to late winter feasts weren't just Yule. Many communities held minor festivals after midwinter, marking the return of longer days or simply surviving another brutal stretch. They were modest compared to summer blots, but no less vital. Ritual wasn't just for gods, it was for people, to remind them they were still here, still together. The feast is humble, some dried fish, boiled roots, the last of the smoked venison, a stew thick with lentils and desperation. But it's hot and it's shared. Everyone eats, even those who haven't spoken in days, even the thin woman from the corner now sitting a little straighter. There's no formal speech, but Halvard raises a horn of weak mead and says simply, "We're still here," and everyone repeats it softly, "We're still here." The singing starts again. It's not good, but it's loud. There are verses you don't know and verses no one knows, but it doesn't matter. Solveig grabs your arm and drags you into a circle of clapping, spinning bodies, and for a brief moment you're not cold, not tired, not on the edge of survival. You're part of something, a living thing. You laugh, you don't mean to, but it slips out unguarded, and no one looks at you like you don't belong. Fringe tradition. Some Norse villages baked symbolic loaves during this winter feast, shaped like the sun or the first flowers of spring or animals they hoped would survive the thaw. These were sometimes burned in the fire as offerings, or buried in the snow with a wish. It wasn't about food, it was about belief, a gift to the season itself. After the meal, there's a quieter energy. People begin swapping, not just goods, stories, tools, bits of wisdom. You trade your carved driftwood bird for a small pot of lard. You don't need lard, but the old woman who offers it says, "For your boots, or your face, or your soul, it works on everything." You don't argue. Outside, the snow is still thick, the wind still bites. But it feels less, somehow, like the land itself heard the singing and decided to wait before killing you. That night, Solveig leads a small ritual near the edge of the woods. Just 6 of you. A tiny fire. A wooden bowl of ashes. One by one, each person tosses something in. An old bone charm, a broken knife handle, a lock of hair. "We give the season what it's taken," she says, "and ask for mercy on what remains." You toss in your first carved horse, the one that looked more like a bear with arthritis. It feels right. A small goodbye. Open scholarly debate. Did these midwinter feasts carry actual religious weight, or were they purely social coping mechanisms? Some scholars argue they were extensions of seasonal blots. Others believe they were invented organically by communities needing something to mark time. Either way, they mattered. In a season with no clocks, no calendars, no sun, events were what made the world move. Back in your hut, you light a small candle, the one you've been saving, sputters at first, then catches, casting flickering shadows across your cramped space. Astrid shifts behind the wall. The smell of stew still lingers in your scarf. There's music echoing faintly through the snow, and you swear someone is still singing that same off-key verse about a goat with frostbitten knees. You smile, for real, not because it's over, but because you believe, for the first time, that it will be. You fall asleep with the wax still burning low, and dream of green things, roots and rivers and air that doesn't hurt your teeth when you breathe. The feast was small, but the hope? It's enormous. You notice it first by the smell. It's faint at first, earthy, strange, almost sweet. But it doesn't belong to stew, smoke or snow. It creeps in under the door like an unwelcome guest, slowly coiling around the hearth. Solveig notices it too. She lifts her head mid-stir, sniffs the air and frowns. "Something's gone soft," she mutters. You don't ask what she means. You already know. The ground's too frozen to dig. It has been for months. Every death, every loss, every final exhale has had to wait, wrapped tightly, bound with care, placed in the ice. Today you learn what happens after. The smokehouse is usually where fish and meat are cured, but for the past several weeks a corner has served a more solemn purpose. Temporary storage for the dead. It sounds crude, but it's done with reverence. No one jokes about it. No one forgets. And now the first signs of thaw mean the earliest bodies must be dealt with. You follow Solveig out to the smokehouse, boots crunching over the snow that's slowly beginning to crust and sag. The door creaks open. The air inside is thick with cold and memory. The light barely reaches the back wall, but you see them. 3 shrouded forms stacked like firewood. One of them is Harrick, the man Jorund half killed and Halvard half spared. He didn't last long after. Infection, maybe. Cold or just everything. Halvard is already there, silent. He nods to you. "We dig tomorrow," he says. "You can't. Not yet." The frost hasn't loosened, so today is about preparation, choosing the burial site, carving the grave markers, wrapping the bodies in new cloth, painting the stones that will sit at their heads. It's grim work, necessary, heavy in your hands, heavier in your chest. Historical fact, in parts of Scandinavia during deep winter the dead were often stored in snowbanks or within outbuildings until the ground thawed enough for proper burial. This wasn't considered disrespectful, just practical. But when the time came, burials were treated with care, often including grave goods, carved stones, and rituals meant to protect both the dead and the living. You help shave the ice from a flat stone. On it, you carve simple symbols, a spire tree, a sun. Solveig adds a rune, Manaz for humanity. He wasn't a great man, she says, but he was ours. The others work quietly around you. Ingrid prepares herbs. Halvard oils the bindings. Jorund, to everyone's surprise, carves a bowl from a chunk of frozen driftwood and places it beside Harrick's shroud. He always liked stew, he mutters, then walks away. It doesn't feel like mourning, it feels like relief. One less mouth, one less fire, one less burden, and yet no one says that aloud. Quirky practice alert. In some Norse households, a dead person's shoes were removed and reversed to prevent them from returning as a draugr, a walking corpse with the unfinished business. Some were even buried with iron nails driven into their feet, just in case. You don't see anyone doing that here, but Solveig does whisper something under her breath when she knots the shroud closed. You don't ask what. That night the mood in the longhouse is strange. Not somber, but not light either. Someone hums a song you haven't heard before, something soft and low and clearly meant for the dead. Halvard passes you a bowl of broth. "Tomorrow we bury," he says. "Even if the ground's hard." He nods. "We'll break it." The next morning you're handed a pickaxe. The gravesite is set near a rocky hill, where the sun reaches early. What little sun there is, you chip, you dough dig. The ground fights you. But you win, eventually. The bodies are carried out one by one, wrapped, ready. Each laid in their shallow bed with the same quiet care given to the living. You say nothing, no eulogy, no poetry, just a long, aching shed that is broken only by the scrape of stone and the creak of old knees. The last body, the old man who coughed for weeks, is lowered in with a single bowl of pine needles beside him. His granddaughter sobs once, then bites her lip and lets it bleed. After the burial, Solveig lights a small fire and tosses herbs into the flame. The smoke coils upward, dark and fragrant. "To the earth," she says, "to the snow, to the ones who walked and now rest." And the wind seems to pause, just for a moment. Open, scholarly debate. How were winter burials handled when the weather turned too cold to dig? Some historians believe families left the bodies inside, treated with spices and oils. Others suggest outbuildings like you've seen. Smokehouses, storage huts, acted as temporary tombs. There's no single answer, just bones and stories. Back in the village, no one speaks loudly, not out of grief exactly, but out of respect for the silence, because winter isn't just about survival, it's about remembrance, about carrying the weight of those who didn't make it. You sit by the fire that night, staring at your boots. One still leaks snowmelt. Your feet are cracked, Your eyes sting, but you're here, and they are not. You whisper a name, not yours, not anyone else's. Just a name, picked from your own memory, someone you knew once or maybe dreamed about. You whisper it to the flames, because you can, because you should, because in this kind of winter, remembrance is resistance, and silence is the last prayer you can offer. The air has changed. You feel it in your lungs before you even open your eyes, less brittle, less like glass shards scraping your throat with every breath. It's still cold, yes, but there's a softness now, a whisper of moisture in the wind. You step outside and see it, the first drop of water sliding down from the eave of the longhouse, darkening the wood as it falls. It's melting, slowly, stubbornly, but undeniably. The snow hasn't vanished, of course. It's still piled high, dense and grey, like dirty sugar packed against every wall and path. But there's slush now around the edges. Drips echo from rooftops. The icicles hang like glistening daggers in retreat. Even Astrid, crusted with mud and shedding winter fur like it personally offended her, seems to lift her head with something like curiosity. The villagers feel it too. People move differently today. Not faster. Everyone's still half-starved and sore, but lighter. You see more eyes meeting, more voices raised. A few people even smile without trying. You don't quite believe it yet. You've seen enough false starts. Days that warm just enough to break hope, only for another storm to come crashing down. But this time, maybe. You've made it to the edge of the season, not the finish line, just the slippery, uncertain in-between. And that's exactly when things get weird. The bears are waking up. Solveig warns you while you're gathering kindling near the tree line. Listen for snapping, she says. Underbrush, not twigs. If it sounds like something large decided to stop being dead, run. She's only half joking. Oh. Historical fact, spring in Viking Age Scandinavia meant more than sunshine and soggy fields. It meant predators returning. Bears especially were feared in early Thor. Groggy, hungry and aggressive, they'd wander close to villages, drawn by garbage pits and livestock. Some Norse communities even left offerings to them, both out of fear and respect. That night a dog goes missing. The next morning Jorund finds tracks near the goat pen. Massive tracks, spaced wide, deep. He stares at them for a long time without speaking. Then he walks back into the longhouse and sharpens every axe he owns, loudly. You sleep a little closer to the fire after that. But not even the threat of bear mauling can undo the hope that's settled into people's bones. The rhythm of life shifts, slowly but unmistakably. Tools come out of storage. Not knives and spears, but rakes, spades, seed bags. People start scratching at the still frozen soil with desperate little claws of metal, like they can will it into softness. One of the boys tries to plant something. It immediately dies. He plants another. It also dies, but he doesn't stop, because planting means something, even if it's too early, even if it fails. You help melt snow for water now, not for drinking, but for scrubbing, cleaning tools, washing hands, wiping soot from the longhouse beams. The windows are scraped clean. Someone sweeps the threshold. It feels like the village is exhaling slowly together. Then Halvard calls a meeting. You all gather near the central fire pit. The last of the snowdrift has been cleared from it, revealing the blackened stones beneath. He stands there, tall as ever, face weathered, eyes harder than when you first met him. He says just one thing, count what's left. So you do. The food stores are almost gone. There's enough barley for 2 weeks, fish for 1. Root vegetables are mush or mould. The goats look questionable. The last 2 chickens are starting to eye you with suspicion. But there's enough to make it to foraging season, if the weather holds. If. Fringe belief check. Some Norse communities believed in a spirit called Varvetre, or the Spring Watcher, a fickle being who decided when the earth was ready to open. You had to greet her properly, with song, fire and an offering buried just beneath the snow. If she was pleased, the ground would thaw. If not, you'd get another month of frost. No one speaks of her directly here, but Solveig places a bowl of honey outside that night. She doesn't explain. You don't ask. Then comes the real test. A child goes missing. Not for long, just a few hours. But in winter, that's enough to cause panic. A search party is formed instantly. You join without hesitation, feet already wet, lungs tight from the sudden run into the trees. The snow is melting in uneven patches, revealing thick mud and hidden roots. You fall twice. Jorund curses so loudly it echoes. You find the boy near the river, sitting on a stone, watching it flow, the river flowing. The ice is cracking and shifting, the water rising in little bursts of freedom. It rushes over stone like a new voice speaking after months of silence. The boy looks at you sheepish. I just wanted to hear it. No one scolds him. You all just listen. Open scholarly debate. Did Norse people view the spring thaw as a purely practical event or a spiritual one? Some say the return of water was revered, life flowing back into the land. Others suggest it was treated with wariness. Thaw meant floods, unstable terrain, disease. It wasn't a clean rebirth. It were messy and dangerous, like most beginnings. You carry the boy back on your shoulders. He's heavier than you remember, but so is everything. Later that night, the river's sound still hums in your ears. You sit near the fire, rubbing your aching knees, and notice something. The candle by your bed no longer flickers from the draught beneath the door, because there is no draught, because the wind has changed, because something has shifted. You lie down to sleep, and for the first time you don't wrap yourself like a corpse trying to trick death. You let one foot dangle into the open air, and it's not warm, but it's not frozen either. And that's enough. You've made it to the thaw, barely, but you're still here. You stand in mud, not slush, not ice. Mud. Thick, sticky, unapologetic brown earth that clings to your boots and refuses to let go. Your feet sink a little deeper with each step until you learn to slide instead of stomp, moving like a tired ghost through the village. The snowbanks are melting into grimy islands. Patches of grass appear like bruises on the landscape. Greenish yellow, tentative. You don't want to call it spring just yet. That feels like tempting fate. But whatever it is, it's not winter. You've made it. Well, mostly. Because survival, it turns out, doesn't come with a trumpet blast or a congratulatory goat. It just sort of happens. One minute you're sharpening your knife in case the world goes feral, and the next you're noticing a bird. Just one, perched stupidly on the roof, fluffing its feathers like it invented sunlight. You stare at it for a full minute before realizing you're smiling, and then you remember you're still alive. So let's talk about that. Let's count it all up. Your fingers, all 10. Cracked, yes. Permanently calloused, sure, but attached. Your toes, still there, although one has definitely changed colour. Your face, a little hollower. Your eyes, a little sharper. You catch your reflection in a puddle and don't quite recognise the person looking back. Someone leaner, older, maybe wiser. Definitely someone who's learned how to gut a fish in under 5 minutes and spot frostbite before breakfast. You're not the same, and neither is the village. The longhouse doors now stay open for hours at a time, letting out the heavy winter air and inviting in something newer. The children run again, not aimlessly, but with purpose. Chores, deliveries, curiosity. One of them is even singing. It's off-key, but it's got rid of rhythm, a sign of civilization. You help rehang laundry lines. You dig shallow ditches for runoff. You patch holes in the roofs. You even smile back when someone smiles at you first. Ingrid, terrifying as ever, hands you a bundle of seeds. Plant them near the southern wall, she says. If they grow, you don't suck. A ringing endorsement. Halvard spends his days walking the perimeter of the village, arms crossed, lips tight. He's no longer the man holding back collapse. Now, he's the one building what comes after. You nod to each other when you pass. It's not friendship, it's recognition. Solveig starts a running list on a flatboard. Supplies needed, repairs required, animals lost and animals born. You glance at it and realise something alarming. Your name is there, next to roof repairs and wood splitting. You're officially someone who's counted on. Historical fact. When Viking communities emerged from winter, the first priority wasn't celebration, it was triage, assessing damage, redistributing what was left, and rebuilding what had been lost. Leadership might shift, roles were reassigned, some families merged, some splintered. But the main goal was simple, make sure the next winter didn't kill you. You get your first blister that week. Not from chopping wood, not from hauling water, from digging, real digging. The soil, now soft, yields beneath your spade as you prepare ground for planting. Your hands are clumsy at first. Solveig watches with mild amusement. You're holding it like it owes you money, she says. Relax, you don't, but you do get better. The burial stones remain in place near the ridge. You visit them sometimes, not out of obligation, but because they're part of it now, part of this. The thaw doesn't erase the cold, it just makes room beside it. quirky Viking touch. Some Norse communities believed the spirits of the dead lingered near the homestead until the first spring planting. They were consulted for guidance, protection, or at least to not sabotage the crops. Food or drink was sometimes left near the burial stones. You leave a crust of bread one morning, just in case. Then comes the final rite of the season, the reckoning. No drums, no trial, just quiet math. You sit with Solveig one evening near the fire, both of you eating stew made from things that probably shouldn't still be edible. She pulls out a flat bone, scratches marks into it with a knife, and begins tallying. How many did we lose, you ask. 7, she says. Could have been 10. How many goats? 3. Chickens? 2. One might have just left. Can they do that? She shrugs. I'd leave 2 if I had wings. You both fall quiet. Then she asks, and you? You blink. Me? Would you have made it without us? And you think about it, really think about the first cold morning, the blisters, the frostbite, the mistakes, the fear, the hunger, the times you thought about giving up, curling into your blanket and just not waking up. No, you say, I wouldn't have. She nods. No. Then don't forget that next time. Open scholarly debate. Did Viking Age survival hinge more on individual toughness or communal strength? While sagas glorify lone heroes, archaeological and anthropological evidence leans hard toward community. Shared labour, shared food, shared knowledge. These were the real reasons anyone made it through. Winter didn't reward strength, it rewarded cooperation. That night, a new fire is built outside. The wind is warmer. The stars are visible, bright and clean and oddly close. Someone brings out a drum, not for war, for rhythm. You join the circle slowly, drawn in like smoke. Someone sings, you clap, someone tosses a piece of bread into the fire. For the gods, for the sun, for the goats. Laughter. Solveig bumps your shoulder. You're not the worst addition we've had, she says. You grin. That night, for the first time since this all began, you sleep without a weapon by your side. You still dream of ice. But now there's fire too, and maybe, just maybe, flowers. So here you are, mud-splattered, smoke-scented, muscles set in places you didn't know existed, and miraculously not dead. You survived a Viking winter. The kind of winter that doesn't care about your feelings, your plans, or your modern sensibilities about what temperature humans should be allowed to exist in. No thermostats, no fleece blankets, just cold fire, guts, and whatever scraps of dried fish you could wrestle away from a half-feral goat named Astrid. Looking back, it's kind of absurd how close the edge was at all times. Starvation was never a dramatic threat. It was just always there, sitting beside you at the table, eyeing your bowl like it might be next. Illness hovered in the air with the same casual ease as the chimney smoke. And people you learned to care about, disappeared. Not in some epic blaze of glory, but quietly, in the night. In the silence, in the cold, and still you endured. Not because you were the strongest, not because you had the sharpest axe or the best runes carved into your boots. You endured because you listened, you watched, you followed the rhythms of a world that has no patience for arrogance. You leaned into the warmth of others, even when you didn't trust it. You asked questions, you learned when to speak, when to work, and when to just shut up and eat the pickled herring without making a face. You survived because survival is boring, unglamorous, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary. And now the birds are back. The river is rushing, the goats are birthing tiny confused creatures that wobble like drunk toddlers. The seeds have been planted, the sun has found your skin again. You are not a visitor anymore. You are part of the story, and maybe one day someone will carve your name into the beams of a longhouse, or into the hilt of a blade, or whisper it into the smoke above a feast fire. Maybe they'll say, that one? They made it through the worst winter we'd seen in years, didn't cry too much, knew how to hold a shovel. Or maybe they won't say anything at all, because the greatest compliment in this kind of world is just being here when the ice melts. So if you're listening to this in bed, warm under your own blankets with your little box of glowing light nearby, remember, this wasn't just a bedtime story, this was a test. And you passed. Now close your eyes, let the cold drift away, let the fire crackle out. Spring is coming, and you've earned the right to see it.